You wake before the sun, though calling it waking might be too generous. It feels more like being dragged unwillingly from a shallow, uncomfortable sleep by the cold itself. Your eyes open slowly in darkness, and for a few confused moments, you simply lie there, wrapped in rough wool that scratches your skin, listening to the quiet misery of the room around you. Someone coughs nearby. Someone else snores softly. A chicken, for reasons no one fully understands, makes a suspicious little noise somewhere inside the house. You blink into the darkness of your home, if such a grand word can even be used for a structure made mostly of mud, wood, straw, and stubborn optimism. The air smells faintly of smoke, damp earth, old sweat, and animals. Because naturally, the animals are also here. A goat rests in one corner. Chickens wander whenever they please. Sometimes even a pig finds temporary shelter indoors during especially harsh weather. Medieval peasant life does not concern itself with ideas like personal space. Your back already hurts. This is unfortunate because the day has not even started yet. You shift carefully on the straw mattress, which is less mattress and more pile of vaguely dry plant material pretending to be furniture. It crackles underneath you. Something tiny crawls somewhere beneath the blanket. You decide with great emotional maturity not to think too deeply about what that might be. Perhaps a flea, perhaps several fleas, perhaps an entire flea kingdom with local government and tax laws. Better not dwell on it. Outside, darkness still rules the village. There are no clocks, of course, but you know the rhythm of the world well enough. The rooster has not fully committed to shouting yet, though he seems emotionally close to the decision. You hear wind slipping through tiny cracks in the walls. Cold air sneaks into every corner of the room like an unwelcome guest who refuses to leave. Winter is worst, naturally, but even warmer seasons carry morning chills strong enough to make getting out of bed feel like volunteering for punishment. And unfortunately, punishment is exactly what awaits if you stay in bed too long. Fields do not plow themselves. Crops do not care if you are tired. The local lord certainly does not care. You rub your eyes and slowly sit up, immediately regretting the movement. Your joints complain loudly. Medieval peasant life ages people quickly, and even if you are young, your body already feels much older. 30 years old? Practically ancient by village standards. 40? Congratulations, you may now qualify as local wisdom. 50? People might quietly assume you possess magical powers. Around you, the household begins to stir. Someone shifts near the fire pit in the center of the room. Last night's embers sleep beneath gray ash, and soon someone, probably you, if luck is feeling especially cruel, will coax them back into life. A medieval morning begins with effort. Always effort. You stand carefully, bare feet touching cold dirt packed hard beneath years of use. Floors in your home are not polished wood or smooth stone. No. Your floor is essentially the ground itself, only indoors. Luxury. You stretch carefully while your stomach reminds you that yesterday's dinner was not exactly generous. Hunger is an old companion here. Not dramatic hunger, the kind poets cry about while staring tragically into sunsets, but practical hunger. Familiar hunger. Quiet hunger. The sort that lives in the background of your life, like an unpaid debt. You step outside. The village greets you with darkness and dampness. Mud waits patiently everywhere. Mud on paths. Mud near houses. Mud surrounding animals. Mud that somehow finds new and creative ways to ruin your day. Rain turns roads into nightmares. But even dry weather cannot fully defeat medieval dirt. Your shoes, if you are fortunate enough to own decent ones, are already tired of existence. Smoke curls weakly from a few neighboring homes. Somewhere nearby, another peasant has begun their day before yours. You hear soft movement in the distance, a cart creaking, quiet voices, a dog barking without enthusiasm. Nobody in your village wakes feeling refreshed. Nobody wakes excited for productivity. This is not a motivational morning routine. No cheerful sunrise meditation. No inspirational cold plunge. No carefully brewed coffee. Just survival. The sky slowly begins changing color, though the sun still hides below the horizon. Gray spreads across everything, soft and sleepy. For one brief moment, the village almost looks peaceful, Almost. If you ignore the smell, and the poverty, and the disease, and the fact that one failed harvest could completely ruin everyone, you walk toward the shared well or nearby water source, carrying something to fill. Clean water is never guaranteed, which feels like an important detail that your stomach will unfortunately remember later. The cold morning air bites your face. You pull rough fabric tighter around yourself. Nearby, neighbors emerge slowly from homes just as tired-looking as yours. Faces worn by labor, hands rough from years of work. People who probably stopped expecting comfort a very long time ago. Conversation comes quietly. A nod, a muttered greeting. Nobody wastes energy on unnecessary enthusiasm before sunrise. Everyone knows the day ahead will be long, very long. You glance toward the fields stretching beyond the village. Your fields, but not really yours. That is the tricky thing about medieval peasant life. You work land that belongs to someone else, a noble lord, most likely. A person who sleeps much warmer than you do, eats much better than you do, and almost certainly has never worried about stepping on mysterious damp patches indoors. You owe labor, you owe taxes, you owe crops, you owe obedience. The system works beautifully for everyone except you. Still, complaints do not help much. Survival demands movement. The sky brightens further. Birds begin making noise overhead. Animals wake reluctantly. Somewhere, church bells may soon ring, reminding everyone that time moves forward whether anyone likes it or not. And so you return inside for the first miserable meal of the day. Breakfast waits, or at least something pretending to be breakfast. Perhaps thin porridge. Perhaps coarse bread so hard it feels emotionally aggressive. Perhaps leftovers, if fortune smiles briefly upon your household. But before all that, there is fire to tend, tools to gather, chores already waiting impatiently, because your day has barely begun. And the exhausting truth of medieval peasant life is this. The first thing you notice about breakfast is that calling it breakfast feels oddly generous. In another life, perhaps breakfast means warmth, comfort, or the cheerful smell of something frying in butter. Perhaps it arrives on polished tables beside fresh bread and steaming drinks. In your world, breakfast mostly means good luck. You step back into the dim hut, and somehow the inside feels colder than before. Smoke hangs stubbornly in the air. The fire pit in the center of the room has only just begun returning to life, and someone, likely tired, mildly irritated, and questioning every decision that led to medieval existence, is crouched beside it, poking weak embers with iron tongs. The room glows softly, not warmly, softly. There is a difference. Warmth suggests comfort. This merely suggests survival. You crouch near the fire, holding your hands close enough to feel something but not close enough to singe yourself. Smoke drifts upward lazily before gathering beneath the roof, trapped there like a bad decision nobody can undo. Your eyes sting slightly. This happens often. A medieval home breathes smoke the way people breathe air. Nobody loves this arrangement. Nobody questions it much either. Across the room, someone begins preparing what passes for the morning meal. A pot hangs above the weak fire. Inside, possibly porridge, probably disappointment. Most mornings begin with something made from oats, barley, or whatever grain managed not to disappear during harder months, thin enough to pour, bland enough to inspire absolutely no excitement. You stare into the pot. The pot stares back. Neither of you feels optimistic. Perhaps there will be bread, though bread deserves clarification. Modern people imagine golden loaves with soft centers and pleasant smells. You unfortunately know the truth. Medieval peasant bread has ambitions of becoming building material. Dense, dark, sometimes suspiciously hard, occasionally possessing textures that suggest accidental contact with gravel. Your teeth, already exhausted by life itself, quietly prepare for battle. Someone hands you a rough wooden bowl. The bowl has seen things. Years of things. Scratches cover its surface. Tiny marks left by meals nobody remembered, and winters nobody enjoyed. You hold it carefully while thin porridge slides inside with the enthusiasm of wet cement. Breakfast has arrived. Technically, you sit carefully on a stool that leans slightly to one side in a manner that inspires absolutely no confidence. Nearby, someone coughs again. The cough sounds familiar. Too familiar. Illness lives close to everyone here. Sometimes it visits briefly. Sometimes it moves in permanently. The strange thing about medieval sickness is how ordinary it feels. A fever, a cough, an infection, a stomach illness from bad water. These things belong to daily life, the same way weather belongs to the sky. People rarely panic immediately. Panic costs energy, and energy is expensive. You blow lightly across the porridge. Steam rises weakly, not enough to feel luxurious, just enough to remind you the food exists. You take a bite. It tastes fine, not good, not terrible, simply there. Food in medieval peasant life rarely exists for joy. It exists to prevent dying. Flavor is optional. Survival is mandatory. You eat slowly, partly because there is no rush, partly because rushing only means finishing sooner. And finishing sooner means remembering hunger again. Hunger sits quietly beside every meal, always waiting, always patient. Even during decent harvest years, food never feels guaranteed. You know this. Everyone knows this. A single storm, a bad season, a failed crop, one unusually cold winter. Suddenly your village becomes very familiar with desperation. Perhaps you still remember famine stories told quietly around fires, stories of empty fields, of neighbors growing frighteningly thin, of families boiling strange roots simply because there was nothing else. Nobody tells these stories dramatically. That would require emotional energy. Instead, they speak plainly, like discussing weather. Bad things happen. Then life continues. Usually, you chew carefully at a piece of coarse bread. The bread resists. Naturally. Of course it resists. Why would anything in medieval life cooperate? You tear another piece away slowly. Crumbs scatter. A chicken notices immediately. Chickens in your home possess an extraordinary talent for appearing exactly where food becomes available. The bird stares at you with unsettling confidence. You stare back. A quiet understanding passes between you. Neither of you lives particularly glamorous lives. Someone mutters nearby. Someone else yawns. The house slowly grows louder as morning settles properly over the village. Children shift beneath blankets. Adults prepare tools. Wood creaks softly. Outside, distant voices drift through cracks in the walls. The village is waking. Reluctantly, nobody wakes with purpose here. Purpose suggests ambition. This is something simpler. Necessity. You glance toward the doorway. Soon the real work begins. Animals. Repairs. Carrying things. Fixing things. Lifting things. Endless things. Medieval labor specializes in repetition. Every day resembles the one before it, except harder. Weather decides your mood more than you do. Rain means mud. Mud means misery. Winter means cold. Summer means heat. Harvest season means exhaustion. And somehow there is always work. Always. Even on days when your body protests. Even when sickness arrives. Even when grief visits. Work continues. Fields do not pause for emotional processing. Your bowl empties too quickly. You dislike this. Not because the food was wonderful. It absolutely was not. But because empty bowls create uncomfortable thoughts. Thoughts like, will dinner be enough? How much grain remains? Will this winter be worse? You set the bowl aside. Someone scrapes the pot for leftovers. Nothing gets wasted. Nothing can afford to. Nearby, a child asks quietly for more food. The silence afterward answers the question. Not today. Outside, morning light finally begins creeping across the village. Gray skies soften. Smoke rises from nearby homes. Neighbors prepare themselves for labor. You hear carts moving faintly. Animals complaining. Someone shouting at something stubborn. Probably a goat. Goats seem emotionally committed to inconvenience. You stand carefully. Your stomach feels less empty. Not full, just less empty. An important distinction. You gather yourself slowly. Boots if you have them. Layers if weather allows. Tools waiting nearby. The field is already calling. Not kindly. Never kindly. Because medieval peasant life operates under one very simple philosophy. If something hurts, keep working. You step outside into the sharp morning air and immediately regret every life decision that somehow resulted in medieval farming. The cold greets you first. Not politely. Cold in medieval life behaves less like weather and more like a personal insult. It creeps through clothes, settles into fingers, finds every weak place, and stays there with extraordinary commitment. The village stretches slowly awake around you. Mud everywhere. Naturally, there is always mud. Mud between homes, mud beside fences, mud attempting ambitious relationships with your boots. If roads exist, they are mostly theoretical. A cart rattles nearby with the enthusiasm of something deeply offended by movement. Its wheels protest loudly. The horse pulling it appears emotionally exhausted. Fair enough. You understand each other immediately. Smoke rises lazily from rooftops. Thin gray trails drifting into the pale sky. Some homes smell faintly of cooking. Others smell like damp straw, wet wood, and ongoing disappointment. A dog wanders past, thin, suspicious, probably surviving on optimism and stolen food. Nearby, someone argues with a chicken. The chicken appears to be winning. Again, animals in medieval villages possess an unreasonable amount of confidence, particularly geese. Geese seem personally offended by human existence. You avoid eye contact, a survival instinct. The field waits beyond the village. Waiting feels generous. The field demands. Rows of soil stretch ahead, dark and uneven, carrying the quiet threat of endless labor. You stare at it briefly. The field stares back. Nobody feels inspired. Tools rest nearby, heavy, simple, unforgiving. Nothing here believes in comfort. You grip a wooden hoe, worn smooth by years of tired hands. Hands very much like yours. Hands that worked through sickness, through hunger, through winters that felt endless. Medieval peasants rarely stop. Stopping risks falling behind, and falling behind risks hunger. Hunger again. Always hunger. It follows people here like an unpaid debt. You begin working, slowly at first. The earth resists. Naturally, why would medieval dirt cooperate when medieval bread already declared war on your teeth? You push harder. Lift, turn, repeat. Lift, turn, repeat. Hours seem deeply committed to moving as slowly as possible. Your shoulders begin complaining. Your back joins the protest shortly afterward. The sun climbs higher, which sounds pleasant. It is not. Warmth eventually arrives carrying fresh problems. Sweat replaces cold. Clothes stick uncomfortably. Flies discover your existence and immediately become far too interested. Somewhere nearby, someone sighs with the emotional exhaustion of a person who fully understands. There are still 10 more hours of this. Nobody talks much. Talking wastes breath. Breath feels valuable. Instead, people work quietly. The rhythm becomes strangely hypnotic. Tools scraping soil. Animals shifting nearby. The distant sound of someone shouting at something stubborn. Still probably a goat. Goats remain committed to chaos. A child runs past carrying water, too carefully, as though spilling even a little might trigger national tragedy. Honestly, fair. Clean water enjoys a complicated relationship with medieval life. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it introduces diseases nobody can pronounce. You pause briefly, not for comfort. Comfort remains fictional, mostly because your hands hurt. Blisters form quickly here. Skin toughens or suffers, usually both. You glance toward the village. Lunch exists somewhere in the future. Hopefully. Probably bread again. Possibly soup. Potentially disappointment wearing different clothes. Because medieval life has many surprises, most of them unpleasant. Because by now, you understand the truth. Medieval life does not reward effort. It merely punishes stopping. You finally reach the fields, which, somehow, already look tired. The soil waits in uneven rows, dark from yesterday's rain, and carrying the personality of something deeply offended by human optimism. Nearby, someone is already working. Of course they are. There is always one person who somehow begins labor before everyone else. Nobody likes this person. Nobody says it out loud, but the feeling exists. A thin old farmer, wrapped in faded indigo, glances towards you briefly. Not unfriendly, not welcoming either. Simply acknowledging that yes, unfortunately, both of you are alive and expected to continue suffering productively. You grip your wooden hoe tighter. The handle feels familiar, smooth in places, splintered in others. The sort of object that quietly reminds you life has been difficult for many people before you. You begin. Again, the first strike into the soil feels unpleasantly honest. Hard earth resists immediately. Naturally, nothing in medieval life has ever heard of cooperation. You press harder. Lift, break, turn. Lift, break, turn. The rhythm arrives quickly, not enjoyable, merely inevitable. Nearby, someone coughs. Someone else mutters something deeply negative about weather. Weather controls everything here. Too much rain? Rot. Too little rain? Starvation. Too much cold? Frozen crops. Too much heat? Also disaster. Farming occasionally feels less like work, and more like negotiating with an invisible enemy who deeply dislikes peasants. A crow lands nearby, watching, judging. Medieval birds possess an unreasonable amount of confidence. You suspect the crow believes this field belongs to him. Honestly, perhaps it does. He certainly seems more emotionally prepared for survival than anyone here. Hours pass strangely. The sun climbs higher. Your shoulders ache properly now. Back pain settles in with the confidence of an unwelcome relative planning to stay permanently. You straighten briefly. Immediate regret. Everything hurts more once noticed. You understand now why medieval people often looked permanently exhausted in paintings. Because they were. A nearby worker pauses to drink water from a wooden bucket. Questionable water. Hopeful water. Water carrying exactly enough uncertainty to feel mildly threatening. Nobody discusses this much. Discussion changes nothing. You wipe sweat from your forehead. Dirt replaces sweat almost immediately. You are no longer entirely certain where your skin ends and the field begins. Somewhere farther away, voices rise suddenly. You glance over. Two villagers appear to be arguing. About what? Impossible to know. Could be boundaries. Could be livestock. Could simply be the emotional consequences of being awake this early. Nobody intervenes. Energy remains limited. Arguments, like weather, usually pass eventually. Hopefully. A cart creaks nearby, loudly. Everything wooden in medieval life sounds moments away from collapse, yet somehow survives, mostly through stubbornness. A child walks carefully between workers carrying bread wrapped in cloth. Lunch approaches. Optimism rises slightly. Dangerous. You have made this mistake before, because medieval lunches operate under very familiar rules. Lower expectations. Avoid disappointment. Lunch arrives. Technically, you sit beneath a tree that offers less shade than emotional support. Still, you appreciate the effort. The ground feels damp. Of course it does. Everything medieval eventually becomes damp. A child carefully unwraps cloth bundles with the seriousness of someone handling royal treasure. Inside, bread. Again, naturally, though this bread somehow feels even more ambitious in its attempt to become stone. You tap it lightly against your palm. Solid. Concerningly solid. Weapon grade, perhaps. Nearby, someone receives a small wedge of cheese. You notice immediately. Everyone notices immediately. Cheese qualifies as emotional news around here. A brief silence spreads. Not jealousy exactly. More respectful admiration. Someone mutters quietly, "Lucky." Nobody disagrees. You receive half an onion, a deeply confident onion, sharp enough to attack your eyes before you even bite into it. You stare at lunch. Lunch stares back. Neither side seems thrilled about this arrangement. Still, hunger lowers standards impressively. You bite into bread. The bread fights back. Naturally, you suspect medieval bakers occasionally confuse flour with masonry. Chewing becomes an activity requiring focus, commitment, and perhaps prayer. Nearby, workers eat quietly. Nobody wastes energy talking much. Talking means less eating, and less eating feels like poor strategy. One old villager carefully saves part of lunch for later. Smart, optimistic, slightly heartbreaking. Food exists under permanent suspicion here. Never fully trusted, never guaranteed. A dog appears nearby. Then, you return to the field, reluctantly. The field, somehow, looks larger than before. This feels unfair. You are reasonably certain the land expands during lunch purely out of spite. The afternoon sun hangs overhead now, no longer gentle, no longer forgiving. Morning cold has fully surrendered to sticky heat. Your wool layers suddenly feel like personal punishment. Sweat settles everywhere. Dust follows immediately. Together, they create something that can only be described as medieval glue. You pick up the hoe again. Your arms object immediately. Your back files several formal complaints. Nobody listens. Certainly not the field. You begin working. Again. Lift, break, turn. Lift, break, turn. The rhythm returns. Familiar, endless, slightly cruel. Hours lose shape here. Time becomes strange in fields, measured less by clocks and more by discomfort. Back pain means morning past. Hunger means midday. Complete emotional exhaustion means afternoon. Somewhere nearby, a farmer argues loudly with an ox. The ox appears unimpressed. Animals in medieval life often possess the confidence of creatures fully aware humans need them more than they need humans. The ox refuses movement. The farmer grows increasingly philosophical about suffering. Nobody interferes. This feels private. A breeze passes briefly. Tiny miracle. Gone immediately. Cruel miracle. You miss it already. Nearby, someone wipes sweat with a sleeve so dirty, the effort feels symbolic rather than useful. Another worker pauses briefly, staring into the distance with the expression of someone mentally negotiating with existence itself, then resumes digging, because alternatives remain limited. A cart rolls past carrying bundles of firewood. Its wheels creak loudly enough to sound emotionally exhausted. Honestly fair. Everything medieval seems one bad moment away from collapse, yet somehow survives. Mostly through stubbornness and lowered expectations. Clouds gather briefly overhead. Hope rises. Rain might cool things down. Rain might help. Rain might. No. The clouds leave. Naturally, even weather enjoys disappointing peasants. You continue digging. Hands ache now. Blisters worsen. Skin hardens whether you approve or not. This body belongs increasingly to labor, not comfort. Comfort feels fictional. Invented perhaps by nobles, probably indoors, somewhere very far away. You glance toward the village, still distant, still waiting. Dinner exists somewhere in the future, hopefully. Dangerous thought. Hope behaves unpredictably here. Best not trust it too much. A nearby worker suddenly laughs. Unexpected. Everyone pauses slightly. Turns out someone slipped in mud. Nobody injured, just humiliated. This qualifies as entertainment. Laughter spreads briefly. Small, tired. Real, then fades. Work resumes, because joy, like lunch, never stays long. The shadows finally begin stretching, slowly, mercifully. Evening approaches, not rest exactly, merely different problems. Because medieval evenings come with their own special surprises. Cold, darkness, and somehow, more work. The sun finally begins surrendering to the horizon, slowly, reluctantly. Much like everyone working beneath it, you straighten again, carefully this time. Experience has taught you that sudden movements now carry consequences. Your back cracks loudly, a deeply medieval sound. Somewhere nearby, someone jokes weakly that at least nothing important broke. Nobody laughs much. The joke feels too realistic. Tools grow heavier toward evening. Not physically, emotionally. A hoe in the morning feels manageable. A hoe after hours of labor feels like a deeply personal insult. You wipe dirt from your hands. Pointless. The dirt remains. It has committed to residency. Nearby, workers begin gathering tools with the exhausted coordination of people who no longer trust their own legs. Nobody moves quickly. Quickness abandoned this village generations ago. The walk back begins. Slowly, a line of tired villagers drifts toward home beneath fading gold light. Boots sink softly into familiar mud. Of course, the mud waited patiently all day. Loyal, really. Someone carries firewood. Someone else drags a broken tool with quiet resentment. A child trails behind half asleep, clutching stale bread like treasure. Nobody speaks much. There are simply no spare thoughts left. The village grows larger ahead. Smoke rises from chimneys again. Dinner preparation. Optimism returns briefly. Dangerous optimism. You know better by now. Still, the thought of warmth matters. Even weak warmth. A dog wanders beside the group, hopeful, still emotionally invested in everyone's dinner situation. Its dedication deserves respect. You pass neighbors repairing fences. Again, fences in medieval life seem locked in permanent disagreement with reality. Somewhere, someone argues with a stubborn goat. Still, of course, the goat appears committed to winning. Honestly, probably will. The village sounds different now. Less waking, more surviving. Pots clatter. Children complain softly. Someone coughs. Someone sings badly while carrying water. Nobody stops them. Energy for criticism feels unavailable. You finally reach the hut. The door creaks open. Familiar smell. Smoke. Damp straw. Wood. Fatigue. Mostly fatigue. Inside, firelight flickers weakly. The room feels slightly warmer than morning. Not warm, just less hostile. A pot hangs above the fire again. Promising. Suspiciously promising. You glance inside. Stew, technically. Mostly water. Some vegetables, possibly turnips. Hopefully not only turnips. A dangerous hope. Someone tears bread. Again, naturally. At this point, bread feels less like food and more like medieval tradition. You sit carefully, very carefully. Every muscle now negotiates movement like a political argument. The stool still leans. Faithfully, against all odds, it continues existing. Dinner begins quietly. Nobody rushes. Nobody wastes food. The room fills softly with chewing, tired sighs, and fire crackling beneath another uncertain night. Because in medieval life, surviving the day only means one thing. You get to do it all again tomorrow. Night arrives quietly, not peacefully, quietly. There is a difference. Peace suggests rest. Night in medieval life mostly suggests new problems wearing darker colors. Outside, the village fades into shadow. No glowing streets. No comforting lamps stretching into the distance, only moonlight, scattered stars, and the occasional stubborn lantern fighting a losing battle against darkness. The wind slips through cracks in the walls again, persistent, disrespectful. You move closer to the fire, so does everyone else. Personal space remains a luxury nobody can afford. The stew disappears quickly. Not because it was excellent, because hunger negotiates aggressively. A final crust of bread passes between tired hands. Nobody refuses. Nobody feels dramatic about it. Food leaves too quickly to become emotional. Nearby, someone carefully mends torn clothing by weak firelight. Needles move slowly. Eyes squint harder. Fabric survives another day. Mostly, nothing here gets replaced, unless absolutely necessary. Objects in medieval life do not retire. They merely become slightly different objects. A shirt becomes patches. Patches become rags. Rags become something useful for cleaning disappointment. Children grow quieter. One sleeps against a parent's shoulder before anyone notices. Another fights sleep heroically, then loses. Blankets emerge, heavy, scratchy, questionable, warm enough if expectations remain reasonable. A villager coughs again. Too long, too hard. Nobody says much. Worry exists. Quietly, always quietly. Medicine feels uncertain here. Sometimes herbs help. Sometimes prayer helps. Sometimes neither feels particularly convincing. Still, morning comes either way. Usually, someone quietly tells a story near the fire. Nothing grand. No kings. No dragons. Just familiar stories. Bad harvests survived. Hard winters endured. Neighbors remembered kindly. Small victories matter here. Very small. Outside, something moves in darkness. Probably an animal. Hopefully an animal. Nobody investigates. Curiosity feels expensive at night. The fire weakens slowly. Orange becomes red. Red becomes faint. Conversation fades with it. Words grow smaller, softer. People drift toward sleep, the way exhausted people drift toward anything promising temporary escape. You settle onto rough bedding. Straw underneath, wool above. Somehow both itchy and cold at the same time. Impressive, honestly. Your body aches properly now. The sort of exhaustion that settles into bones. Tomorrow already feels unfair, but tomorrow also feels unavoidable. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks. Someone snores immediately. Someone else mutters in sleep. The village quiets completely. Darkness settles. The fire gives one final flicker, then stillness. And just before sleep finally arrives, one last medieval thought drifts quietly through your mind. Hopefully the bread is softer tomorrow. Unlikely, but hopeful. Morning returns. Cruelly, you were not consulted. One moment, sleep. The next, cold. Again. The fire has long since surrendered during the night. Ash sits quietly where warmth used to exist. You stare at it briefly, disappointed, not surprised. Disappointment loses energy when repeated often enough. Someone is already awake. Of course they are. There is always one person committed to suffering early. A figure wrapped in faded wool kneels beside the ashes, poking stubborn embers back toward life with iron tongs and unreasonable optimism. The hut feels colder than memory. How this happens every morning remains deeply unfair. Blankets leave reluctantly. You understand. If blankets possessed emotions, they would also refuse medieval mornings. Nearby, someone yawns dramatically enough to sound personally betrayed by existence. Fair. Children remain bundled tightly, temporarily victorious against responsibility. Adults receive no such luxury. Outside, a rooster announces dawn with undeserved confidence. Nobody appreciates the enthusiasm, especially not this early. The smell of damp wood returns. Smoke follows shortly after. Faithful, unwanted, constant. Breakfast preparation begins again. A familiar pot, a familiar fire, a familiar sense of emotional resignation. You already suspect porridge. The porridge somehow also suspects itself. Nearby, yesterday's bread waits patiently, still hard, perhaps harder. Impressive dedication. You briefly wonder if medieval bread grows stronger overnight. Possible. Concerning if true. Someone opens the door. Cold air enters aggressively. So does reality. Fields still exist. Naturally, a brief silence settles over the room. Everyone thinking roughly the same thing. Again? Apparently yes. Because farms remain deeply unsympathetic to personal exhaustion. Animals require feeding. Wood requires carrying. Water requires lifting. Everything medieval requires effort. Immediately. Always. A dog wanders into the doorway, hopefully, still emotionally committed to breakfast opportunities. Consistency deserves admiration. A chicken appears shortly afterward. Less hopeful, more demanding. The villagers barely react. At this point, humans and animals simply tolerate one another professionally. You warm your hands near weak flames again. Smoke stings your eyes again. Someone coughs again. Patterns matter here. Not good patterns, just familiar ones. The bowl arrives. Porridge, technically food, emotionally uncertain. You stare at breakfast. Breakfast stares back. Nobody wins. Still, you eat, because medieval life runs on one deeply exhausting principle. No matter how tired you are, the day begins anyway. And somehow, despite everything, life continues. Not dramatically, not heroically, just stubbornly. The village wakes around you once again. Doors creak open. Smoke climbs into the pale sky. A cart rattles somewhere in the distance, with the unmistakable sound of wood, reconsidering its entire purpose. You step outside. The morning air bites immediately. Cold again. Naturally, the mud has survived the night, faithful as ever. Boots sink slightly with every step, as though the earth itself quietly objects to movement. Nearby, a woman carries water in heavy wooden buckets, balanced carefully against tired shoulders. No complaints, just practice. Complaining requires energy. Energy remains expensive. An old man repairs a fence, already beginning to fail again. Fences in medieval life rarely solve problems. They simply postpone arguments. Children chase one another briefly through the lane before responsibility remembers them. A mother calls sharply. Fun ends. Efficiency return. A rooster struts proudly through the mud as though personally responsible for sunrise. Nobody challenges the confidence. Confidence feels admirable when food remains uncertain. You pass the village well. A small line has already formed. Wooden buckets, quiet conversations, tired faces. Everyone waiting patiently for water, carrying just enough mystery to remain mildly concerning. Nobody discusses this. Some truths feel unhelpful before breakfast. Beyond the cottages, smoke drifts across low rooftops. The whole village smells faintly of wet straw, wood smoke, damp earth, and exhaustion. An oddly consistent fragrance. You almost grow fond of it. Almost. The fields wait again. Of course they do. Fields never seem finished. You suspect they multiply overnight. No evidence. Just emotional certainty. Beside a barn, someone struggles to convince a goat to cooperate. The goat disagrees. Firmly. This appears normal. Goats, by now, feel less like animals and more like ongoing medieval problems. Nearby, an ox watches everything with complete emotional detachment. Wise, honestly. The village slowly stretches into full motion. Hammering begins somewhere. A child cries briefly. Someone drops something heavy. Someone else swears quietly at weather, despite perfectly normal skies. Habit, perhaps. You pause for a moment, not dramatically, just enough to feel the weight of another identical day settling quietly onto your shoulders. Yesterday already feels repeated. Tomorrow already feels familiar. Still, the sun rises. The tools wait. Work calls. Not kindly. Never kindly. Because medieval life teaches one lesson faster than any priest, king, or scholar ever could. Survival is mostly repetition. And so, without ceremony, the day begins properly. No trumpet announces it. No grand declaration arrives from castle towers. Just cold fingers, aching backs, and the quiet understanding that standing still solves absolutely nothing. You start walking toward the fields. The path feels familiar, in the deeply disappointing way only daily routines can. Mud remembers every footstep. The village remembers every struggle. You suspect even the crows have opinions by now. Above, the sky hangs pale and undecided. Not storming, not comforting. Simply existing. Fair, honestly. Beside you, villagers move with practiced exhaustion. Nobody wastes words this early. Conversation belongs to people with spare energy. Most people traded theirs for survival several winters ago. A boy carries tools too large for his hands. He nearly drops one. An older farmer catches it without looking. No praise follows. Competence in medieval life feels less like achievement and more like minimum requirement. Further ahead, someone already argues with a wheel stuck in mud. The wheel refuses compromise. The mud refuses mercy. Nobody appears surprised. A dog trots between cottages, carrying something deeply suspicious in its mouth. Nobody asks questions. Life improves occasionally through strategic ignorance. The fields finally spread before you. Endless rows. Uneven soil. Promises disguised as hard labor. The earth waits patiently, as though yesterday's effort somehow failed to impress it. You kneel. Hands into dirt again. Cold seeps through everything immediately. Naturally. The work begins. Digging. Lifting. Clearing stones that somehow return, no matter how many times they disappear. You start suspecting the land grows rocks recreationally. The sun climbs slowly overhead, offering light without much warmth. Generous enough to be visible, not generous enough to be useful. Hours pass strangely here. Too slow when your stomach complains. Too fast when your back remembers it contains bones. Nearby, someone coughs hard into the morning air. Someone else laughs at something you cannot hear. A farmer mutters quietly at stubborn soil, like a man negotiating with destiny itself. The soil remains unconvinced. Above everything, birds continue singing as though this entire arrangement seems perfectly reasonable. Optimistic creatures. You straighten for a moment. Only a moment. Long enough to stretch aching muscles and wonder whether exhaustion eventually becomes personality. Probably. A bell rings faintly from somewhere back in the village. Not freedom. Certainly not rest. Just another reminder that time continues moving whether your legs approve or not. Eventually, morning stops pretending to be gentle. The sun climbs higher, though higher feels ambitious for something still refusing proper warmth. Your hands ache now. Not dramatically, just consistently. The kind of ache that settles quietly into your bones and announces, with complete confidence, that this will absolutely become tomorrow's problem as well. You keep working, because stopping means falling behind. And falling behind in medieval life carries consequences nobody enjoys discussing. Mostly because the consequences usually involve hunger. The soil remains stubborn. Of course it does. You pull weeds that seem deeply committed to existing. You move stones that somehow return with suspicious determination. You briefly consider whether the earth itself simply dislikes people. A fair theory, honestly. Nearby, a farmer wipes sweat from his forehead despite the cold. Work ignores weather. Work has no personality beyond inconvenience. Someone shares a piece of rough bread during a short pause. Not lunch, not generosity exactly, more survival with manners. The bread feels dense enough to qualify as defensive equipment. You chew carefully. Your teeth deserve respect. Replacement technology remains disappointing. Across the field, voices rise briefly. Nothing serious. Just disagreement about boundaries, tools, or perhaps whose goat caused trouble this time. Goats, somehow, continue contributing chaos far beyond reasonable expectations. The argument fades quickly. Nobody possesses enough energy for dramatic feuds before midday. A crow lands nearby and watches silently, judgmental somehow. You suspect medieval crows understand too much. The hours drag onward. Sun overhead. Back aching. Hands dirty. Thoughts increasingly philosophical for someone mostly moving dirt around. You begin wondering strange things. Will next winter feel worse? Did people 50 years ago complain this much? Has anyone ever genuinely enjoyed farming? The answers remain unavailable. The dirt offers little emotional support. At some point, someone nearby starts humming quietly while working. No performance, no audience. Just rhythm against exhaustion. Oddly comforting. Because survival here rarely looks heroic. Mostly, it looks like tired people continuing anyway. The village feels far away now. Hidden behind distance and smoke. Still there. Still waiting. Just like tomorrow. And tomorrow's work. And tomorrow's mud. The mud, especially, feels eternal. By midday, hunger begins negotiating aggressively. Not politely, not subtly. With the full confidence of something that knows it will eventually win. The work slows. Not because anyone chooses rest, exactly. More because bodies quietly begin filing complaints. Hands stiffen. Shoulders ache. Everyone suddenly remembers they are, in fact, made of bones. Someone calls for a break. The announcement spreads across the fields with the energy of deeply exhausted relief. You settle onto a patch of dry ground, ambitious enough to call itself comfortable. It is not comfortable. But standards have adjusted significantly. Lunch arrives. Calling it lunch feels optimistic. A rough piece of bread appears again. Some onions, perhaps weak cheese. If fortune briefly remembered your existence, maybe a bit of ale. Mostly because medieval water continues maintaining a deeply complicated reputation. Nobody eats quickly. Food feels too valuable for speed. Nearby, someone tells a story you've already heard 3 times. Nobody objects. Entertainment, much like food, remains limited. A farmer laughs hard anyway. Another nearly falls asleep sitting upright. Understandable. Sleep at this point feels less like luxury and more like spiritual ambition. A dog circles hopefully near the group. Optimistic creature. Someone tosses it a scrap. The dog reacts as though divine generosity has personally intervened. Honestly, fair reaction. Across the field, smoke rises from distant cottages. The village looks peaceful from here. Deceptively peaceful. Distance improves nearly everything. Even medieval life occasionally benefits from not being inspected too closely. The wind shifts slightly. You smell damp earth again. Smoke. Animals. Something faintly unpleasant nobody acknowledges anymore. Adaptation feels powerful. or concerning? Hard to say. Someone eventually stands. The signal spreads without words. Break over. Nobody celebrates this information. Nobody negotiates. The tools wait patiently nearby like old enemies with excellent attendance records. You rise slowly, back protesting immediately. Legs reconsidering their responsibilities. Still, the afternoon waits, and medieval days possess a remarkable talent for feeling both endless and somehow unfinished at the exact same time. The afternoon arrives without apology. The sun hangs overhead now, brighter perhaps, though still strangely unwilling to provide actual comfort. You return to work, because medieval life operates on a simple principle. If something needs doing, it continues needing doing whether you feel inspired or not. Mostly not. The fields stretch endlessly again. Rows to clear. Soil to turn. Tasks repeating themselves with the quiet confidence of inevitability. You begin to understand why people in this century age aggressively. Time moves differently here. Not measured in clocks, measured in weather. Harvests. How much bread remains. How close winter feels when the wind changes direction. A cloud passes overhead. Brief shade. Tiny miracle. Gone immediately, naturally. Nearby, someone sneezes hard enough to concern everyone for a moment. Then work continues. Medical science, at present, remains mostly hopeful guessing and strong opinions. An older worker rubs aching hands and mutters something deeply unfriendly toward farming. The soil, once again, refuses emotional feedback. You continue. Lift. Carry. Dig. Repeat. At some point, repetition stops feeling temporary and begins introducing itself as lifestyle. A cart rattles past carrying tools and supplies. Its wheels complain loudly. Fair enough. Everyone else is complaining internally. Further down the field, two villagers pause to argue over something impossibly small. A missing tool, perhaps. A misunderstanding. Maybe simple exhaustion. Finally looking for entertainment. The disagreement ends quickly. Nobody here possesses enough spare strength for long-term drama. Even resentment seems tired. Birds circle lazily overhead. The breeze shifts. Somewhere far off, a bell rings faintly. Time moving again. Always moving. You pause just briefly to straighten your back. Immediate regret. Everything hurts more, once acknowledged. A dangerous discovery. The village still waits in the distance, smoke curling gently upward from rooftops. Warmth exists there. Theoretically. Eventually. For now, though, the work remains unfinished. Of course it does. Because medieval labor follows one universal rule. The moment you think you are done, something else immediately needs fixing. Slowly, almost suspiciously, the day begins leaning toward evening. Not quickly, never quickly. The sunlight softens across the fields, turning dirt and tired faces briefly golden, as though exhaustion somehow deserves better lighting. A generous illusion. You keep working anyway. Because the field does not care what time it is. The field has no sympathy, no patience. Only expectations. A farmer nearby stretches his back and makes a sound that feels alarmingly older than the man himself. Concerning. Though, honestly, everyone here sounds slightly injured by existence. The tools grow heavier now. Or perhaps your arms simply begin reconsidering their loyalty. Hard to say. The wind shifts colder, naturally. Warmth in medieval life rarely stays long enough to become emotionally reliable. Someone finally says the words everyone has been quietly hoping to hear. Enough for today. Relief spreads invisibly. Nobody cheers. Nobody celebrates. Energy no longer supports enthusiasm. Instead, tools are gathered slowly. Mud-covered boots drag back toward the village. Shoulders bend beneath invisible weight built, one identical day at a time. You walk with them. The path home feels longer somehow. Or perhaps exhaustion stretches distance into cruelty. Nearby, someone jokes weakly about tomorrow's work. Nobody laughs very hard. Tomorrow remains too believable. A goat blocks the path briefly. Again. The goat refuses urgency. The goat respects no schedule. The goat answers to chaos alone. Eventually, Compromise happens, mostly because people are too tired to argue with livestock. Smoke rises thicker now from cottage chimneys. Dinner preparation begins across the village. The smell reaches you faintly. Wood smoke, boiling vegetables, bread if luck feels unusually generous. Your stomach notices immediately. Across the lane, children move slower now too. Even their energy appears negotiable by sunset. An old woman sits outside repairing clothes in fading light. Hands practiced, eyes tired. Still working, because stopping, in medieval life, mostly means sleeping. And sleeping simply prepares you to begin again. The village settles into evening, one quiet sound at a time. Footsteps, low voices, a distant hammer finally stopping. Animals complaining softly about arrangements nobody asked their opinion on. You pause near the edge of the village, the sky darkens slowly overhead, and for one brief moment, before tomorrow begins threatening your future again, there is something almost peaceful about surviving another day. Evening arrives properly now, not dramatically. No glowing celebration of survival. Just darkness arriving with professional consistency. The village slows around you. Smoke drifts upward into the cooling sky. Doors close one by one. The muddy lanes grow quieter, though never completely quiet. Villages, like exhaustion, always seem to make noise eventually. You step back inside the cottage. Immediately, the familiar smell returns. Smoke, damp wood, wet straw. A faint and ongoing disagreement with proper ventilation. Home, apparently. The fire struggles in the center pit, not dead, not enthusiastic either. A pot hangs above weak flames, producing something generously described as dinner. You stare at it briefly. Hope feels ambitious. Still, hunger lowers expectations faster than philosophy ever could. Someone tears rough bread into pieces. A bowl passes quietly between tired hands. Nobody speaks much. Talking requires energy. Energy remains aggressively limited. The food tastes functional, not terrible, not memorable. Just enough to remind your body that giving up entirely would feel inconvenient. Nearby, someone rubs sore hands. Someone yawns hard enough to resemble surrender. Outside, wind presses softly against the cottage walls. Animals settle restlessly somewhere nearby. A dog barks once, then regrets the effort. The light grows weaker. Candles remain expensive. Firewood remains important. Darkness, unfortunately, remains free. So the evening becomes shorter than you would prefer. There are no glowing screens, no endless distractions, no comforting promise that tomorrow can be ignored for a few more hours. Only tiredness. Heavy, patient tiredness, the kind that settles slowly behind your eyes and reminds you that medieval people rarely struggled with bedtime procrastination. Your body aches now in places you did not realize existed. Back, hands, legs, possibly soul. Hard to confirm. You settle down onto rough bedding again. Straw shifts beneath you with all the elegance of dry leaves negotiating badly. Outside, the village quiets further. A distant voice fades. A shutter creaks. Somewhere far away, someone coughs into the night. Tomorrow waits already. The fields wait. The tools wait. The mud almost certainly waits. But for now, briefly, there is sleep. Unearned by comfort. Earned entirely by exhaustion. Night settles fully over the village. Cold returns first, naturally. It slips through cracks in the walls with quiet confidence, as though personally offended by human comfort. The fire weakens further. A few glowing embers remain, trying their best. Respectable effort. Not successful. Outside, darkness stretches across fields already forgotten until morning. The village grows quieter now, not silent, never silent. Wood creaks softly. Animals shuffle somewhere nearby. Wind presses gently against roofs that look permanently one bad storm away from reconsidering existence. You close your eyes. Sleep should come quickly. After all, exhaustion has spent the entire day preparing for this moment. But medieval nights possess their own personality. A stubborn personality. The bedding scratches. The cold lingers. Your back quietly remembers every decision made earlier in the field. You shift slightly. Immediate regret. Somehow every position feels equally disappointing. Nearby, someone snores with admirable commitment. Someone else coughs into the darkness. Outside, a dog barks again. Possibly at danger. Possibly at absolutely nothing. Hard to know. Night feels larger here. Without streetlights. Without noise. Without modern distractions convincing your brain to remain awake for no reason at all. Just darkness. Heavy, endless darkness. The stars stretch overhead unseen beyond the roof. Cold and distant, and entirely uninterested in your agricultural concerns. Fair enough. At some point, sleep finally arrives. Not gracefully, not peacefully. More like your body simply decides consciousness has become financially irresponsible. Thoughts blur. Tomorrow fades briefly out of reach. No fields, no mud, no stubborn goats negotiating chaos into ordinary life. Just rest. Temporary. Because somewhere beyond the darkness, morning already waits patiently. Cold morning. Hungry morning. Mud-covered morning. And when it comes, the village will wake again. Doors will creak open. Smoke will climb into the pale sky. A cart will rattle somewhere in the distance, with the unmistakable sound of wood, reconsidering its entire purpose. And somehow, despite everything, life will continue, not dramatically, not heroically, just stubbornly. But sleep, unfortunately, never lasts as long as hope suggests. Morning returns. Again, not politely, not gently, certainly not with concern for your preferences. You wake before the sun fully commits to existing. Cold greets you immediately. Reliable companion, honestly. The cottage sits in darkness, except for weak traces of dawn, sneaking reluctantly through cracks in the wall. Someone nearby already moves. Quiet footsteps, soft coughing. The unmistakable sound of another person beginning a day they absolutely did not request. Outside, the village stirs again. A rooster announces itself with unreasonable confidence, still proud, still loud, still behaving as though sunrise depends entirely upon personal effort. No evidence supports this. Yet confidence survives. You sit up slowly. Mistake. Every muscle submits formal complaints. Back aching. Legs stiff. Hands already tired somehow, despite accomplishing absolutely nothing since yesterday. Impressive efficiency from the human body. The straw beneath you shifts unhappily. The blanket offers only symbolic protection from the cold. Nearby, someone pokes weakly at yesterday's fire. A few reluctant embers glow, not enough for optimism. Enough for survival. Barely. Breakfast approaches. A dangerous word, honestly. You already know expectations must remain humble. Perhaps rough bread. Perhaps porridge thin enough to qualify as rumor. Perhaps disappointment served warm, if fortune feels creative. Outside, the lanes slowly wake. Doors creak open once more. Smoke begins climbing into pale morning air. Buckets knock softly against wooden wells. Someone mutters unhappily at weather, despite the sky behaving completely normally. Tradition matters. A cart groans past somewhere nearby. The wheels complain louder than the person pulling it. Fair arrangement. You step outside again. Cold bites immediately. Of course it does. The mud survived the night. Faithful as ever, boots sink slightly with every step, as though the earth quietly objects to ambition. The village stretches awake around you. Another day beginning. Another day repeating. Another day quietly asking one simple question. How badly would you like to continue surviving? The answer, inconveniently, appears to be quite badly. Because despite everything, the cold, the mud, the suspicious relationship medieval bread maintains with enjoyment, people continue. You continue. The village hums quietly with familiar misery. Not dramatic misery. Routine misery. The sort that wakes up on time and still remembers its responsibilities. Near the well, the morning line grows longer. Buckets wait patiently. People wait less patiently. Nobody argues. Not because everyone agrees. mostly because nobody feels energetic enough for conflict before sunrise. A woman adjusts a heavy basket against tired shoulders. A boy struggles heroically, with firewood approximately his own size. An old man squints suspiciously at the sky, as though personally offended by clouds existing in unpredictable arrangements. Reasonable, honestly. Weather feels dangerously important when your entire future depends on dirt cooperating. Nearby, someone tries milking a stubborn cow. The cow expresses strong philosophical disagreement. This appears normal. Animals in medieval life rarely assist. They participate reluctantly. A blacksmith begins work somewhere nearby. Metal strikes metal. Sharp ringing echoes through the village. The official sound of productivity, beginning whether anyone feels emotionally prepared or not. Smoke thickens above rooftops. Breakfast smells drift faintly through cold air. Boiled grains. Wood smoke. Hope attempting modest improvements. You eat standing up. Because chairs remain limited, and comfort feels suspiciously luxurious. The food disappears quickly, not because it tastes remarkable. Mostly because hunger continues negotiating from a position of extreme confidence. Soon enough, the village shifts again. Tools collected. Carts prepared. Quiet conversations fading into work. The day stretches ahead like a very long promise nobody remembers agreeing to. Fields again. Mud again. Effort again. Repetition, you're beginning to realize, isn't failure here. It is survival wearing work clothes. And somewhere deep down, beneath exhaustion and cold and deeply questionable breakfast decisions, you understand something quietly important. Nobody in medieval life wakes expecting greatness. They wake expecting necessity. And somehow, against all odds, necessity keeps the whole village moving. So once again, the road to the fields begins. Familiar now. Uncomfortably familiar. The same muddy path. The same cold air, pretending kindness, while quietly attacking your fingers. The same feeling that perhaps, somehow, life has become one extremely long Tuesday. Villagers move beside you in slow determination. Nobody rushes. There is nowhere exciting enough to justify rushing. A farmer yawns hard enough to concern nearby wildlife. Another quietly eats the final piece of breakfast while walking, multitasking in the only way medieval survival really permits. Ahead, the fields wait patiently. Of course they do. They always wait. The land possesses remarkable confidence in your return. Unfortunate confidence. The first hour passes slowly. Work resumes immediately. Hands into dirt. Tools into soil. Back into suffering. The usual arrangement. You dig. Carry. Clear. Repeat. At some point, physical labor stops feeling like activity and starts feeling like atmosphere. Nearby, someone mutters to themselves while planting. Not angry exactly. Just conversationally exhausted. Understandable. Words sometimes help the silence feel less enormous. A rooster appears briefly near the edge of the field for reasons nobody understands. Confidence intact, purpose unclear. A goat wanders too close to someone's crops. Tension rises immediately. The goat, predictably, remains emotionally unaffected. An argument begins, not loud, not dramatic. Just tired people disagreeing with the specific exhaustion of individuals who still have 6 more hours of labor ahead of them. Eventually, someone shoos the goat away. Temporary victory. The goat almost certainly plans revenge. The sky brightens overhead. Clouds move slowly. Birds continue behaving as though existence contains joy. Suspicious behavior. You pause only briefly to wipe dirt from tired hands. Mistake. The moment you stop moving, your body begins submitting complaints with terrifying efficiency. Back hurting. Hands stiff. Legs reconsidering cooperation. Still. The morning continues, because time, unlike sympathy, remains widely available. And medieval work follows one simple truth. No matter how tired you feel, the field somehow still expects more. By now, the sun has climbed high enough to suggest optimism. False optimism, naturally. Warmth improves slightly. just enough to convince you things might become pleasant before immediately reconsidering the offer. The field continues demanding attention with impressive emotional indifference. Rows unfinished. Soil uneven. Weeds behaving with complete disrespect for human effort. You work anyway, because the alternative, unfortunately, involves consequences medieval people describe using words like winter and starvation. Strong motivators. Nearby, someone drops a tool and stares at it for a long moment. Not angry, not confused. Just briefly considering whether continuing feels emotionally worthwhile. Eventually the tool wins. Labor resumes. A breeze moves through the field, carrying smells from the village far behind you. Smoke. Bread, perhaps. Animals negotiating loudly with existence. Oddly comforting. Somewhere nearby, a farmer begins telling a story while working, not because the story is urgent. Mostly because silence grows heavy after enough hours beside dirt. The story wanders. Details change halfway through. Nobody corrects anything. Historical accuracy feels less important when everyone is exhausted. A child helping in the field pauses to chase something shiny in the grass. A parent notices immediately. Freedom ends quickly. Efficiency returns. Across the field, two villagers laugh unexpectedly. A rare sound, short-lived, but real. Even exhaustion occasionally makes room for small joys. You lean briefly against a wooden cart. Another mistake, rest introduces dangerous ideas, like stopping forever, or opening a bakery somewhere warmer. Then you remember, bakeries also require waking early and touching disappointment-shaped bread. No perfect system exists. Above, clouds drift lazily. The sky remains beautiful in the deeply inconvenient way nature often behaves during hard labor. You look up for a moment, then back down. Because beauty unfortunately does not harvest crops. And somewhere deep in your increasingly tired bones, you already know lunch still feels impossibly far away. Eventually, impossibly, lunchtime arrives. Not because the work finishes. The work never finishes. Merely because the human body begins threatening rebellion. The tools stop moving one by one, not dramatically, just slowly, with the shared understanding that collapsing into the soil would probably reduce productivity. You lower yourself onto the ground carefully. Very carefully. Because standing up later already feels like a problem for future you. The lunch situation appears. Again, lunch feels optimistic. A piece of rough bread emerges from cloth wrapping. Hard enough to inspire respect. Dense enough to survive political unrest. Perhaps some cheese. Perhaps onions. Perhaps nothing exciting whatsoever. Consistency matters. Nearby, someone drinks weak ale and sighs deeply, as though trying to negotiate peace with exhaustion itself. Another worker removes muddy boots briefly. Immediate regret follows. Nobody comments. Some mistakes teach themselves. Conversation drifts lazily between tired people. Weather predictions based entirely on instinct. Complaints about soil. Complaints about tools. Complaints about goats. Mostly goats. Goats continue maintaining an extraordinary reputation for creating inconvenience out of perfectly ordinary afternoons. A dog appears again. Hopeful. Determined. Morally committed to leftovers. Someone tosses a crust of bread. The dog reacts like royalty receiving tribute. Fair response. The wind shifts slightly. Clouds move overhead. Somewhere nearby, birds argue loudly for reasons nobody understands. A farmer stretches and groans quietly. The sound suggests several important bones have resigned from service. Concerning. Yet somehow normal. You stare out across the fields. So much land. So much work. So many reasons to wonder whether medieval people secretly spent half their lives simply being tired. Evidence strongly suggests yes. Still, there is something oddly peaceful about this moment. No digging, no carrying, no immediate suffering beyond existing comfortably inside mild exhaustion. Brief peace. Temporary peace, because sooner or later, someone will stand up, and the terrible magic phrase will arrive once again. Back to work. And, inevitably, someone does stand up. Too soon. Always too soon. A quiet sigh moves through the group, like collective disappointment, finally finding shape. Lunch ends. Hope ends with it. You rise slowly. Immediate consequences. Legs stiff. Back offended. Entire body briefly questioning leadership decisions. Still, the tools wait, patient, unforgiving. The afternoon begins again, with the same enthusiasm as damp firewood. Minimal enthusiasm. The field stretches endlessly before you, somehow larger than it looked this morning. Suspicious behavior from land, honestly. You return to digging, lift, turn, carry, repeat. The rhythm settles in again. At some point, work stops feeling like individual actions and becomes something closer to weather. Constant, unavoidable, emotionally exhausting. Nearby, someone starts humming quietly again. A tired melody, simple, familiar, no performance, just a person trying to make repetitive labor feel slightly less endless. Others join in now and then, not singing exactly, more like survival occasionally borrowing rhythm. The wind grows warmer for a brief moment. Tiny luxury. Gone quickly. Naturally. A cartwheel breaks somewhere nearby. Nobody panics. This happens often enough to qualify as routine disappointment. 3 people gather immediately. Wood inspected. Complaints exchanged. Solutions attempted with equal parts skill and stubborn optimism. The cart remains unconvinced. Further down the field, someone argues loudly with a goat again. The goat appears victorious. Predictable outcome. You continue working. Because medieval life rewards persistence far more often than enthusiasm. The sun slowly shifts westward overhead. Shadows lengthen almost invisibly. Time moves quietly, unnoticed, except through growing exhaustion. You wipe sweat from your forehead and glance toward the village in the distance. Still there. Smoke rising gently. Home waiting patiently. A comforting thought, though comforting remains a flexible word in medieval life. For now, however, there is still dirt to move. Still tools to lift. Still hours before rest remembers your name. The afternoon drags onward with remarkable determination. Hours blur strangely now. Not fast enough to feel merciful. Not slow enough to properly resent. Just long. Very long. The sun begins slipping lower, softening the edges of everything. Fields glow briefly in warm light, as though exhaustion has accidentally wandered into something beautiful. A generous misunderstanding. You keep working. Because fields admire persistence more than feelings. Nearby, someone counts sacks under their breath. Someone else repairs a broken handle, with the deeply tired focus of a person who understands replacing tools costs more than patience. A child carrying water stumbles slightly. Nothing spills. Small victory. Worth celebrating internally. The wind turns cooler again, naturally. Warmth in medieval life behaves like an unreliable friend, occasionally helpful, rarely committed. A crow lands nearby and watches you work. Judgmental creature. You suspect crows quietly believe humans deserve their problems. Hard to argue sometimes. Across the field, laughter rises unexpectedly again. Short. Sharp. Real. Someone slipped in mud. Nobody injured. Therefore, funny. Medieval humor remains practical. You pause to stretch. Carefully this time. Experience has taught you that moving too confidently leads directly to regret. Your stomach reminds you dinner still exists. Somewhere in the future. Hopeful information. Though dinner itself will almost certainly involve bread sturdy enough to survive minor warfare. Still, food is food. And hunger remains famously unselective. The light changes again. Golden now. Fading slowly. The kind of evening light that makes hard places briefly look softer than they truly are. You glance around the field. Tired people, bent backs, mud-covered boots. Quiet endurance. Nobody here expects greatness. Nobody waits for rescue. The work simply continues because continuing feels necessary. And maybe that is the strange secret medieval life never explains directly. Most survival looks ordinary while it's happening. Quiet, repetitive, unimpressive, until one day, somehow, You realize you survived anyway. Finally, slowly, suspiciously, the day begins loosening its grip. The sun sinks lower now, turning Field's gold in a way that feels almost apologetic, as though daylight suddenly remembers how unreasonable it has been. Too late, honestly. Your hands hurt. Your back hurts. Your relationship with standing upright feels increasingly political. Still, the work begins slowing, not stopping yet, just softening around the edges. Tools move less quickly. People pause slightly longer between tasks. Nobody says much. Words feel expensive by evening. Nearby, a farmer leans heavily on a shovel and stares across the land with the expression of someone personally betrayed by agriculture. Fair reaction. Another worker rubs tired shoulders and quietly predicts tomorrow's weather using methods suspiciously close to guessing. Everyone listens anyway. Hope occasionally disguises itself as confidence. A cart creaks past carrying gathered supplies. The wheels complain loudly again. Consistency matters. A dog trots alongside with complete emotional commitment to absolutely nothing important. Inspiring, honestly. The shadows grow longer. The air cools. Birdsong changes somehow, softer now, slower. Even nature seems tired. At last, someone wipes dirt from tired hands and says the thing everyone has quietly waited hours to hear. That'll do. No cheering follows. Nobody possesses the strength, but relief moves through the field anyway. Invisible. Immediate. Tools lower. Shoulders relax slightly. People begin drifting toward the village like survivors of an argument nobody actually won. You follow. Boots heavy with mud. Legs heavy with consequence. The walk home feels quieter than this morning. Exhaustion edits conversation. Smoke rises ahead from village rooftops. Dinner waiting somewhere. Warmth, theoretically. Rest, eventually. And for now, after another long day of repetition pretending to be progress, the only real achievement that matters feels surprisingly simple. You made it to evening again. The bucket sits empty nearby. Wisely abandoning ambition for the day, you approach your own cottage. The door creaks. A familiar greeting, not welcoming, just loud. Inside, darkness has already moved back in, comfortable in its ownership of the space. The fire requires attention, naturally, because in medieval life, resting first requires additional labor. You kneel, knees complain loudly. Back joins the chorus. Sparks catch slowly, reluctantly. Smoke curls upward, bringing the immediate, deeply ingrained realization that dinner must be prepared. Dinner, that word again. A solid block of bread waits on the rough wooden table. It has not improved since morning. If anything, time has hardened its resolve. Perhaps some leftover porridge. If fortune smiles, fortune predictably appears busy elsewhere. You sit heavily. A chair feels like a spectacular luxury right now, despite being mostly splinters and bad geometry. You eat anyway, because hunger argues louder than taste. Outside, the village continues settling into evening. A shutter bangs in the wind. The day is over. Finally. Completely. Until tomorrow morning, when the mud expects your return. Quieter now. Buckets abandoned for morning. Water resting mysteriously in darkness like a problem scheduled for later. Across the lane, someone chops wood with deeply personal frustration. Reasonable. Winter feels permanently one bad decision away. A woman stands outside hanging damp cloth near fading sunlight, trying unsuccessfully to negotiate with weather. The weather appears emotionally unavailable. Further ahead, the blacksmith finally stops working. Silence settles strangely, where hammering had lived all day. You had almost grown fond of the noise. Almost. A goat blocks the lane again. Of course it does. The goat watches everyone with complete indifference. Like a tiny medieval landlord collecting emotional rent, nobody argues. Experience has taught difficult lessons. Eventually, someone nudges it aside. Temporary peace restored. The sky darkens further overhead. Cooler now. Quieter now. The village exhales around you. Another day ending. Another day survived. Not celebrated. Not rewarded. Simply endured. And strangely, in a world built mostly from repetition and stubborn effort, that already feels like enough. Building expectations that reality simply cannot meet. Still, it helps. The warmth spreads. Slowly. Grudgingly. Your body accepts the truce. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the rough wooden shutters, reminding everyone that shelter remains a temporary agreement with nature. Inside, the cottage grows quieter. Bowls are scraped clean. Not out of politeness, out of necessity. The fire dies down to embers, glowing faintly, like the last remaining energy in your own bones. Someone yawns. A deeply honest sound. You shift toward the straw bed in the corner. The exact same bed that offered zero comfort this morning. It has not improved. Straw remains aggressively unsupportive, but exhaustion significantly lowers your standards for luxury. You lie back. The straw complains. Your muscles complain. Everything complains. But sleep approaches anyway. Not politely, not gently, but with absolute authority. And as the darkness finally takes over, you realize you have successfully completed the most important medieval task of all, surviving just enough to do it all again tomorrow. Becoming emotionally persuasive. Outside, night deepens. The village quiets little by little. A distant door closes. Someone laughs faintly somewhere nearby. A dog barks once, then apparently decides the effort feels unnecessary. Fair decision. The fire cracks softly. For the first time all day, nobody expects anything from you. No tools, no mud, no carrying, no fixing. Only sitting. Only eating. Only surviving quietly for a little while longer, before exhaustion finally claims ownership of the evening. After dinner, the cottage grows quieter. Not silent. Never entirely silent. Just softer somehow. The kind of quiet built from tired people finally running out of energy for unnecessary noise. The fire settles lower, flames shrinking into patient embers. Still trying. Respectable effort. Outside, wind brushes gently against the walls. The village murmurs faintly in the distance. A shutter creaks. Someone coughs. A dog negotiates loudly with the concept of nighttime. For reasons nobody fully understands. Then silence again. You sit for a while longer, not because comfort exists, mostly because standing up feels emotionally complicated. Your hands rest heavily in your lap. Rough now. Tired now. Hands learning the shape of labor, one ordinary day at a time. Nearby, someone repairs clothing by weak firelight. Needle moving carefully, slowly, nothing wasted here. Fabric patched. Tools repaired. Lives held together through repetition and stubborn practicality. Even exhaustion gets recycled. The candle burns lower. Expensive light. Temporary light. Nobody wastes it carelessly. Tomorrow already waits, somewhere beyond the darkness. Fields again. Mud again. Cold mornings. With unreasonable expectations again. You try not to think too far ahead. Tomorrow feels easier when disguised as later. Outside, clouds drift across unseen stars. The village settles deeper into sleep. Doors closed. Animals quieter now. The endless movement of daytime finally surrendered to stillness. At last you stand, slowly. Immediate regret. Everything aches again. Once movement resumes, predictable betrayal from the human body. You settle back onto rough bedding. Straw shifts noisily beneath you. The blanket offers limited optimism. Still, it is enough. Enough to rest. Enough to recover slightly. Enough to wake tomorrow and begin everything again, whether enthusiasm joins you or not. Because medieval life has a habit of teaching the same lesson repeatedly. You do not survive by feeling ready. You survive by continuing anyway. Night deepens quietly around you. The kind of quiet that feels enormous, not empty, never empty. Just full of small sounds pretending not to matter. The fire settles into glowing embers now. Soft orange light flickers weakly across rough wooden walls. Shadows shift lazily, like tired thoughts refusing to settle. Outside, the wind grows colder. Naturally, cold behaves less like weather here and more like an unpaid village official. Always present, always interfering, never especially helpful. You pull the rough blanket closer. Marginal improvement, still appreciated. Nearby, slow breathing fills the room. Someone already asleep, someone else still shifting occasionally, negotiating unsuccessfully with discomfort. The straw beneath you complains every time you move. Loudly, no privacy exists between you and disappointment tonight. A mouse scurries somewhere nearby. Concerning, but honestly not surprising. At this point, medieval housing occasionally feels less like ownership and more like negotiated coexistence with tiny criminals. Outside, somewhere beyond the cottages, an owl calls softly into the darkness. Mysterious sound, comforting somehow, or mildly threatening. Hard to tell. Your thoughts drift lazily now. The field from today, the work left unfinished. Tomorrow already approaching patiently like a task nobody remembers agreeing to. You wonder briefly whether life ever changes much here. Seasons perhaps. Faces perhaps. But mostly, work. Cold mornings, mud, surviving impossible conditions, goats continuing emotional sabotage. Strangely consistent world. Yet somewhere beneath exhaustion, another thought arrives quietly. People survive this, for years. For generations, not because life became easier, not because anyone solved discomfort, mostly because tomorrow kept arriving. And people kept answering it. A strangely impressive habit, honestly. Your eyes grow heavier. The room blurs softly at the edges. Outside, the village sleeps. Tomorrow waits, patient as always. But for now, just briefly, there is darkness. There is stillness. And there is the rare, deeply valuable feeling of nothing more being asked of you tonight. Eventually, sleep arrives properly, not gracefully, not peacefully exactly. More like exhaustion finally wins an argument your body was never qualified to survive. Thoughts drift apart slowly. The cold fades slightly. The aches soften around the edges. Even the endless list of tomorrow's responsibilities grows quieter for a while. Merciful, honestly. Outside, the village rests beneath darkness. Fields sleeping. Roads empty. The well silent for once. Even the goats, astonishingly, appear willing to pause their campaign of inconvenience until morning. Temporary peace. The stars turn overhead unseen. Wind moves softly across rooftops and narrow lanes. Smoke from dying fires disappears slowly into the night. Hours pass. Quiet hours, the kind that feel endless until suddenly they are gone. And then, without warning, without permission, morning begins returning. Again. First, the cold arrives. Reliable as taxes. Though, admittedly, medieval taxes occasionally felt less personal. A faint gray light creeps slowly through cracks in the cottage walls. Outside, something moves. A cart, perhaps. Someone already awake for reasons difficult to forgive. Then comes the rooster. Still committed. Still impossibly confident. Still behaving like the entire universe personally requested assistance with sunrise. No humility whatsoever. You wake slowly. Bad decision. The body remembers yesterday immediately. Back aching. Hands stiff. Legs somehow tired despite doing absolutely nothing all night except existing badly on straw. Impressive dedication to discomfort. Nearby, someone stirs weakly at the fire pit. A few embers survive. Stubborn little things. You respect that. Breakfast waits somewhere in the future. The fields wait already. The mud, faithful, eternal mud, almost certainly waits with enthusiasm nobody appreciates. Outside, the village begins waking once more. Doors creak open. Smoke rises into pale morning air. Buckets knock softly against wooden wells. Someone quietly swears at weather before even fully stepping outside. Routine matters. Another day arrives. Not special, not dramatic. Just another ordinary medieval morning, asking the same exhausting question it always asks. Ready or not? Shall we do this again? Hey guys, tonight we wake into a world that smells faintly of wet straw, chimney smoke, and the quiet kind of fear nobody says out loud. You are somewhere in medieval Europe, though exactly where hardly matters, because the same unease hangs over villages and cities alike. The morning sky has not yet decided whether it wants to become day, and somewhere outside, church bells ring far too early for comfort. If you've ever complained about answering emails before breakfast, well, tonight you're about to face a world where surviving until dinner is considered a pretty solid achievement. In fact, and I say this with all kindness, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what your local time is right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake because of the bells, not alarm bells exactly. Not the kind that demand immediate panic. These bells carry something heavier, slower, a sound that drifts across damp rooftops and muddy roads like a warning too tired to shout. You lie still for a moment on your straw mattress, if mattress feels generous enough. The straw beneath you pokes through thin fabric, pressing against your shoulders and hips with surprising determination, as though even sleep requires negotiation in medieval times. The room around you is cold, not dramatically cold, in the way winter storms are dramatic. No, this cold settles into the bones patiently. It lives inside stone walls and damp timber. It waits quietly for you every evening and greets you again every morning. You pull your rough wool blanket closer, though it smells faintly of smoke and something older. You decide not to investigate too closely. Outside, the bells ring again, slow, measured, uncomfortable. You already know something feels wrong. Not because anyone has told you. News moves slowly here. There are no flashing alerts or nervous social media posts. Fear travels through glances, unfinished conversations, and neighbors suddenly avoiding one another at the village well. You heard whispers yesterday. A merchant passing through mentioned sickness in another town. Strange swellings, fever, entire households growing silent within days. Someone said it came on ships. Someone else blamed poisoned air. Another person insisted the stars themselves had shifted into dangerous positions. And somehow, despite every explanation sounding slightly ridiculous, none of them feel impossible. Because people are scared. You hear movement nearby. Someone shifting in the darkness. Perhaps family members sharing this single-room house with you. Medieval privacy, unfortunately, is mostly a fantasy. Walls are thin. Space is limited. Personal boundaries are somewhere between unavailable and completely fictional. A child coughs softly. Someone mutters a prayer. The fire in the center pit has mostly burned down to dull orange embers, offering only the memory of warmth. You sit up slowly. The floor beneath your feet feels cold and uneven. Everything in this house carries a quiet exhaustion. The wooden stool by the wall leans slightly to one side. Cooking pots hang overhead, blackened from years of smoke. A basket near the doorway holds stale bread hard enough to qualify as medieval architecture. Outside, the village is beginning to wake. But differently. Normally, mornings bring familiar sounds. Animals protesting breakfast delays, carts creaking into motion, neighbors exchanging tired greetings. Today feels quieter. Too quiet. You step toward the doorway and pull it open. The morning air greets you immediately, cool and wet against your skin. Mist hangs low over the muddy path cutting through the village. Smoke rises slowly from a few chimneys, but fewer than usual. That catches your attention. Fewer chimneys, fewer fires, fewer signs of life. A woman across the lane pauses while carrying water. She notices you, offers the smallest nod imaginable, then quickly looks away. Nobody lingers. Nobody chats. Fear has made ordinary conversation feel dangerous. Near the center of the village, you notice movement around the church. Several people stand together, speaking quietly. Too quietly. You cannot hear words. Only fragments drifting through damp air. Another family. Fever. Gone by morning. The bells stop. And suddenly the silence feels louder. You realize something unsettling about fear in medieval life. It arrives before certainty. Nobody knows exactly what is happening. Nobody understands disease the way modern people might someday understand it. You have no medical charts, no explanations, no trusted experts appearing on television to calmly explain what precautions to take. You have guesses, rumors, prayers, and deeply questionable medical advice involving herbs, bloodletting, or occasionally staring suspiciously at the sky. You probably wish you had hand sanitizer. Unfortunately, what you actually have is optimism and garlic. Medieval healthcare, as you may suspect, leaves a little room for improvement. A cart rolls slowly past. Its wheels struggle through thick mud. The driver avoids eye contact. Covered bundles sit in the back beneath rough cloth. You tell yourself not to assume. But everyone else notices too. Doors close quietly. Heads turn away. Nobody asks questions. And somehow, that feels worse. The uncertainty stretches over the village like fog. Even birdsong feels strangely absent this morning. Or perhaps you simply notice silence more when people are afraid. The church door opens. A priest steps outside. His expression looks practiced. Calm in the way someone becomes calm when they have already run out of answers. He raises his hand slightly, speaking to the gathered villagers. You cannot hear much. Words about prayer, about patience, about God's protection. Comforting perhaps, though even he looks tired. As though sleep has become difficult lately. As though the bells have rung too often. You wonder when fear officially becomes normal. Maybe it happens quietly. One strange rumor becomes 3. One absent neighbor becomes several. One unsettling morning becomes every morning. You glance toward the road leading out of town. Usually travelers pass through regularly. Today it stands mostly empty. Nobody eager to arrive. Nobody eager to leave. Because sickness has a way of turning roads into questions nobody wants answered. You suddenly become aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat. Every itch feels suspicious. Every headache feels meaningful. Every cough becomes terrifying. And if you think that sounds exhausting, congratulations. You are beginning to understand life during the Black Death. The hardest part is not knowing, not yet, not understanding what is coming. Because from where you stand now, the day still looks ordinary enough. The sun slowly rises. Smoke drifts upward. Someone feeds chickens. A dog wanders lazily across the muddy lane. Life continues, stubbornly, quietly, as though the world has not already begun changing around you. But beneath every ordinary moment sits a terrible question. Nobody dares speak too loudly. What happens if the sickness reaches here, and somewhere, far too close for comfort? The bells begin ringing again. The bells fade into the morning air, though the feeling they leave behind does not. You stand there for a moment, just outside your doorway, watching mist drag itself lazily across the village, like it too is uncertain whether to stay or move on. Nobody seems eager to speak. Nobody seems eager to linger. And yet, everyone is outside. Not openly gathering, of course. Medieval people are masters of pretending things are normal, while clearly behaving as though the world might quietly collapse by lunchtime. A man carrying firewood walks too quickly. 2 women whisper beside the well, their conversation stopping the instant someone approaches. An older farmer crosses himself repeatedly while staring toward the road. Rumors have arrived before breakfast. And rumors, in medieval Europe, spread faster than facts ever could. You decide to walk toward the center of the village, mostly because staying inside feels unbearable. Fear grows larger in small rooms. Outside, at least, there is movement. The muddy path squishes unpleasantly beneath your shoes. If your footwear deserves such a generous title. They are little more than worn leather attempting optimism. The smell of damp earth mixes with chimney smoke. Nearby, someone burns herbs. Strong-smelling ones. The kind believed to keep bad air away. Because already, people have begun speaking about the air itself, not ordinary air. Bad air. Poisoned air. Dangerous air. Something invisible and drifting. You hear the word whispered nearby. Miasma. Though nobody explains it with confidence. In fairness, confidence feels rare today. Near the church, small groups stand close together in awkward little circles, speaking low enough that every sentence sounds like a secret. You slow your pace, not enough to appear nosy, just enough to listen. Town south of here. Half the street's sick. Merchant died before sunrise. Black swellings. The phrase catches your attention. Black swellings. You are not entirely sure what that means. Nobody seems entirely sure. But the way people say it makes your stomach tighten. Fear works strangely. Specific details frighten people more than uncertainty. A sickness sounds distant. Black swellings sound real. A baker stands outside his shop, arms crossed tightly. No fresh bread visible. That alone feels worrying. Bread is dependable. Bread belongs to normal life. No bread suggests something has shifted. He notices someone approaching and lowers his voice. You heard about the travelers? The other man nods quickly. From the port city? Apparently ports are already becoming suspicious places. Ships arrive carrying spices, fabrics, stories, and now perhaps disease. Nobody knows for certain, but uncertainty rarely stops blame. Some whisper about merchants. Others blame outsiders. Some blame sinners. A few blame bad luck. One particularly dramatic old man near the well appears to blame nearly everyone. You overhear him muttering, "Told them strange things come from distant lands." He gestures vaguely at absolutely everything. "Foreign winds," he says. Nobody argues, mostly because nobody wants to talk long enough to disagree. The atmosphere feels heavier than yesterday. Not yet panic, something slower, something creeping, like standing outside while distant thunder rolls somewhere you cannot quite see. A young boy runs past carrying a basket. His mother calls after him sharply. "Don't go near the Tanner family." The boy freezes. You notice the way nearby adults suddenly avoid eye contact. Interesting. Very interesting. Apparently there is already a house people are avoiding. The Tanner family. Nobody says why directly. Nobody has to. You glance toward a narrow lane, branching off towards several cottages. Quiet there. Too quiet. Doors shut, shutters closed. And suddenly everyone nearby becomes fascinated with literally anything else. A chicken. A bucket. Clouds. Medieval avoidance is subtle only in theory. A man beside you mutters softly, "They've taken ill." He says it carefully, as though words themselves might spread sickness. "How bad?" someone asks. The man hesitates, then shrugs. "Bad enough." That answer lands heavily. Nobody asks another question, because asking forces details into reality, and reality already feels uncomfortable enough. You continue toward the marketplace. Usually mornings here carry energy. Merchants shouting. Animals complaining. Children weaving through carts. Today, everything feels strangely muted. A fish seller has not opened. Neither has the cloth merchant. One stall stands abandoned entirely. Nobody mentions it, but everyone notices. Markets are supposed to feel alive. This one feels nervous. People buy quickly, speak briefly, leave immediately. A woman hands over coins for vegetables, while carefully avoiding touching the seller's hands. Not dramatic avoidance, subtle avoidance. Fear disguised as politeness. You begin noticing it everywhere. People stepping slightly farther apart. Shorter conversations. Less laughter. More glancing, always glancing. Toward coughs, toward closed houses. Toward strangers. Especially strangers. A traveler enters the market square pulling a tired horse behind him. The entire atmosphere shifts. Conversations stop. People watch him carefully. Nobody approaches. Not immediately. The poor man looks exhausted, mud-covered, hungry, possibly confused why everyone suddenly treats him like he personally invented sickness. He tries greeting someone. No response. Eventually a merchant speaks. "You passing through?" "Just for supplies," the traveler says. A pause follows. Too long, awkward. Then another voice asks carefully, "You been near the southern roads?" Nobody says why they care. Everyone clearly cares. The traveler sighs. People are sick, he admits. That sentence alone changes everything. The market somehow grows quieter. You would think people might panic, run, shout, but fear rarely works that way. Most fear arrives silently. A tightening of shoulders, a shortening of conversations, a sudden desire to return home. The traveler continues speaking. Whole villages frightened, priests overwhelmed. Some towns won't even open their gates. Nobody likes hearing that. Closed gates suggest serious trouble, the kind of trouble too large to ignore. Someone nearby mutters a prayer. Someone else walks away. You suddenly miss ignorance. Just yesterday, sickness felt far away. Today it feels directional, moving, approaching. You wander toward the edge of the square, where older villagers sit quietly beneath a wooden shelter. Normally they gossip, complain, offer unsolicited wisdom. Today they look tired. One elderly woman shakes her head slowly. Feels wrong, she says. The others nod. No debate, no explanation, just agreement. Sometimes fear announces itself before evidence arrives. A strange stillness, an instinct, a feeling the world has tilted slightly out of place. The wind shifts, bringing with it smoke, damp earth, and something unpleasant, faint, difficult to place. You wrinkle your nose. Someone nearby notices. Smells different lately, he says quietly. Then, lowering his voice, they say sickness smells. Wonderful. Now even air feels suspicious. Your medieval anxiety is progressing nicely. Soon you'll distrust weather itself. You begin walking back toward home. The village still moves around you. Still alive. Still ordinary in pieces. But thinner somehow. As though normal life has started fraying around the edges. The bells do not ring again. Not yet. But everyone seems to be waiting for them. Listening without meaning to. Wondering. Counting, hoping, and somewhere behind closed shutters, behind doors no longer opening, someone coughs. Evil morning. You make your way home with the uneasy feeling that the entire village has begun holding its breath. The morning has properly arrived now. The mist is lifting. Light spills weakly across muddy paths and damp rooftops, soft and gray rather than cheerful. Even the sun seems strangely uncommitted today, as though medieval mornings during a plague are not exactly its preferred working conditions either. You pass neighbors moving carefully through ordinary tasks. A woman hangs damp clothes. An old man chops wood. Someone struggles to guide an extremely stubborn goat through the lane, which, honestly, may be the single most historically accurate thing happening all morning. The goat refuses progress entirely. The villager loses patience. Nobody wins. Life, somehow, continues. That feels strange, because shouldn't fear stop everything? Shouldn't people hide indoors? Shouldn't panic arrive dramatically all at once? But real fear tends to arrive differently. Quietly, awkwardly. It slips into routines, rather than replacing them. People still need water, still need bread, still need firewood, even when sickness lurks somewhere nearby. Especially then. Your stomach reminds you that despite growing anxiety, you are still unfortunately expected to eat breakfast. This presents a problem. Medieval breakfast is less of an experience, and more of an ongoing negotiation with disappointment. You duck back inside the house. The warmth has improved slightly. Someone has stirred the embers. Smoke hangs lazily near the ceiling, stubborn and familiar. A pot sits near the fire pit. Inside, something resembling porridge waits patiently. Resembling is doing generous work here. The textures suggest determination rather than flavor. You sit carefully on a rough wooden stool. Nearby, someone tears stale bread into smaller pieces, with the kind of quiet concentration normally reserved for serious life decisions. Nobody talks much. Conversations feel thinner lately. A cough somewhere across the room draws immediate attention. Only for a second, then everyone pretends not to notice. That may be the most frightening thing so far. Not the cough itself. The pretending. Fear changes people before illness ever arrives. A family member pushes a wooden bowl toward you. Breakfast. You examine it carefully. Porridge. Dark bread. Possibly yesterday's leftovers making an ambitious second appearance. You take a bite. The porridge tastes warm, bland, slightly smoky, and somehow comforting despite itself. Food during uncertain times becomes less about enjoyment and more about reassurance. Eating means life still functions. At least for now. Outside, chickens complain loudly. Their optimism feels almost offensive. You glance toward the doorway. The village sounds livelier than before, but not lighter. Activity without ease, movement without comfort. A strange tension hums beneath everything. Someone finally speaks. They say another family's taken ill. The room goes still. Nobody asks who immediately. Nobody wants the answer too quickly. Eventually, which family? A pause. The Tanners. Silence. You recognize the name immediately. Course, the same family people avoided earlier. The same house with shutters closed tight. One person mutters quietly. All of them? The reply comes slowly. Not sure. Not sure. Those two words seem to follow every conversation now. Not sure how sickness spreads. Not sure where it began. Not sure who is safe. Not sure who will still be here next week. You suddenly understand something uncomfortable about living through uncertain history. Nobody experiences it like history. Nobody announces, "Ah yes, welcome to one of humanity's great catastrophes." Mostly people just wake up tired, eat disappointing breakfasts, worry quietly, and try very hard to convince themselves tomorrow will feel normal again. Outside, voices drift through open cracks in the walls. You hear fragments. Doctor coming. Priest visited. Strange marks. The phrase catches again. Strange marks. Nobody describes them the same way. Some say dark swellings. Others say bruises. Others whisper about curses. Fear fills missing information quickly, sometimes faster than truth. You finish eating, though hunger feels complicated this morning. Food tastes different when anxiety joins breakfast. You rise and stretch slightly. Every ache now feels suspicious. That is another unpleasant feature of plague anxiety. Suddenly, your body becomes deeply untrustworthy. A headache? Concerning. Tiredness? Worrying. Random itch? Potential doom. You touch your neck absent-mindedly. Perfectly normal. Still suspicious. Congratulations. You are now participating in medieval self-diagnosis, where every sensation becomes emotionally exhausting. Outside, someone knocks loudly on a nearby door. You hear hushed voices, then footsteps retreating quickly. Nobody lingers long anymore. People still visit neighbors, just briefly. Very briefly, as though friendship now comes with invisible risks. You step outside again. The lane has grown busier. A boy runs past carrying water. Two women exchange bread across a fence instead of standing close together. One man burns herbs outside his doorway. Strong herbs. Sharp-smelling ones. Supposedly protection against corrupted air. The village smells increasingly like smoke, damp wool, anxiety, and whatever desperate optimism herbs are meant to provide. You wander slowly toward the edge of the settlement. Fields stretch outward, green but uneven, beneath gray skies. Farmers still work. Of course they do. Disease or not, crops refuse to pause dramatically for historical disasters. One farmer wipes sweat from his brow. You overhear him mutter, "If we stop planting, we starve anyway." Hard to argue with that logic. Medieval survival rarely offers good choices. Only difficult ones. You hear wagon wheels approaching, slow, heavy. A cart enters the village. Not unusual. Except this one feels different. Nobody greets it. Nobody approaches. The driver keeps his eyes lowered. And again, bundles beneath cloth. Too still. Too carefully covered. The village notices immediately. Conversations stop. Children get pulled indoors. A woman quietly closes her shutters. The cart moves toward the church. No announcement. No explanation. Just quiet understanding. Nobody wants to say the obvious thing aloud, because once spoken, fear becomes harder to ignore. The church bells ring again. Shorter this time. But somehow worse. You notice people counting unconsciously. One bell. Pause. Another. The rhythm feels familiar to them. Unfamiliar to you. But no less unsettling. A man standing nearby whispers softly, "Too many lately." Nobody answers. The village priest appears again, speaking quietly with several families. His shoulders look heavier today. You wonder how many frightened conversations he has already had. How many reassurances he no longer fully believes. Faith may comfort people, but even faith grows tired. The afternoon stretches slowly. Ordinary tasks continue. Animals fed. Water carried. Wood stacked. Yet everything feels fragile. Temporary. As though normal life now balances on thin ice no one can see. And beneath every ordinary moment sits the same growing thought. What if tomorrow gets worse? Because somewhere nearby, behind shutters that remain firmly closed, someone is very sick. And everyone knows it, even if nobody says it. By afternoon, the village no longer feels uncertain. Uncertainty has quietly become suspicion. Not certainty exactly. Nobody fully understands what is happening. But people have begun behaving as though danger has shape now. A direction. A smell. A doorway to avoid. And once fear learns where to point, it becomes much harder to ignore. You notice it immediately. While walking through the village again, people cross roads more often. Neighbors greet one another from farther away. Doors stay closed longer. The Tanner family's lane sits nearly empty. Nobody admits avoiding it. Everyone avoids it. A basket of food has been left outside one of the doors. No knock, no greeting. Just food placed carefully on the ground, and a very quick retreat. Kindness, at a safe distance. Medieval compassion, with a strong appreciation for self-preservation. The air feels warmer now, though nobody seems relaxed. In fact, warmth somehow makes everything worse. Smells grow heavier. Smoke. Animals. Mud. Waste. Cooking fires. And underneath it all, something sour lingering faintly in places people stop discussing. You hear someone nearby whisper again. Bad air. Miasma. The theory has grown popular quickly. The belief sounds simple enough. Disease travels through corrupted air. Foul smells carry sickness. Rot spreads illness, which means avoiding unpleasant smells suddenly feels like medical strategy. You pass several homes with herbs hanging above doors. Lavender, rosemary, mint. Bundles of plants tied together, like hopeful decorations against invisible disaster. One woman presses a cloth against her nose while walking. Strong perfume soaked into fabric. Protection, apparently. Or at least the feeling of protection. And honestly, sometimes those are almost the same thing. A man carrying garlic notices you watching. Helps the lungs, he says. He sounds confident. Suspiciously confident. You nod politely. Because arguing medical science in medieval Europe feels exhausting before lunch. You continue toward the church square, where a crowd has gathered around someone unusual. A physician, or at least, someone attempting the role. The outfit alone announces importance. Long, dark robes. A leather satchel. A face deeply committed to looking serious. No famous plague mask yet. Those become more associated with later outbreaks in larger cities. But still enough theatrical confidence to inspire concern. People stand around him expectantly. Desperately. As though confidence itself might cure something. You drift closer. He speaks carefully, measured. Authoritative. The body, he says, must remain balanced. Several villagers nod immediately, despite having absolutely no idea what that means. He continues explaining humors. Blood. Phlegm. Yellow bile. Black bile. Apparently your health depends on these invisible substances remaining politely cooperative. If one becomes too enthusiastic, problems begin. To modern ears, this sounds questionable. To medieval villagers, this is cutting-edge medicine. You overhear fragments, too much heat in the body. Unclean vapors. Draining excess. And there it is. Bloodletting, always somehow arriving confidently, at the worst possible moment. A frightened man asks what should be done if sickness appears. The physician pauses dramatically. Very dramatic, perhaps medically dramatic. Then begins listing treatments. Herbs, poultices, prayer, fresh air, avoidance of corruption, and possibly removing blood. Because apparently when things go wrong, medieval medicine occasionally responds with, "What if we simply had less blood?" Comforting. Very comforting. Nearby, an older woman shakes her head quietly. My sister tried doctors, she mutters. Didn't help. Nobody asks follow-up questions. That silence says enough. You begin realizing how terrifying illness becomes when medicine offers more hope than certainty. No antibiotics, no understanding of bacteria, no clear explanation. Just theories layered over fear. And a great many people speaking with confidence they absolutely have not earned. You wander farther into the square. A young mother pulls her child closer when someone nearby coughs. The reaction happens instantly. Automatic. Fear has started teaching people new habits. Distance. Caution. Watching. Always watching. You hear church bells again. Not loud, not long, but enough to make conversations stop. Everyone notices bells now. The way modern people notice emergency sirens. The sound reaches into your stomach, not because you know what it means, but because everyone else does. A man nearby sighs heavily. Another burial, he says. Simple. Quiet. Almost tired. No dramatic sadness. Just exhaustion. Too many losses too quickly can wear emotions thin. The churchyard grows busier lately, though not busier in the way anyone wants. You notice something else now. People speak more softly, as though loud voices might disturb whatever invisible thing moves through the village. Even laughter sounds guilty, brief, nervous, quickly disappearing. Someone mentions the stars. Another blames punishment from God. Someone else quietly says traders brought sickness. Nobody agrees. Nobody knows. But humans dislike uncertainty. So explanations multiply. Even strange ones. Especially strange ones. Fear loves certainty more than accuracy. A priest steps outside again. He carries calm the way tired people carry heavy buckets. Carefully, but clearly struggling. He reminds villagers to pray. To stay faithful. To care for one another. The words sound comforting, until you notice how many people avoid standing too close. Faith remains strong. Distance stronger. Near the edge of the square, several boys whisper nervously. One swears someone saw dark marks on a sick man's neck. Another insists entire villages have disappeared. The third clearly embellishes everything dramatically. Medieval gossip, you discover, operates very efficiently. Half warning, half storytelling, entirely stressful. You start walking again. Slower now. The village feels smaller somehow, or perhaps fear makes spaces shrink. Roads narrower, rooms tighter, silence heavier. The ordinary sounds of life continue. Goats arguing, dogs barking, wood splitting, pots clattering. Yet everything carries tension beneath it, as though the village itself waits for bad news already traveling toward it. The sun begins lowering. Long shadows stretch across muddy roads. People head indoors earlier than usual. Less wandering, less lingering. Nobody eager for nighttime, because darkness leaves too much room for worrying. And worrying, unfortunately, is becoming one of medieval Europe's fastest-growing hobbies. As you near home, you glance once more toward the Tanner family's lane. Still quiet, still closed, but now, you notice smoke rising from their chimney. A strange relief settles briefly. Someone inside is still tending fire. Still alive. At least for now. Yet no one enters, no one knocks, no one stays. The village keeps moving around them carefully. Afraid, hopeful, guilty. And somewhere inside nearly every house tonight, people begin checking themselves for symptoms they barely understand. A cough, a fever, a strange ache, a swollen place. Every tiny discomfort suddenly feels meaningful. You rub your shoulder absent-mindedly. Probably nothing. Definitely suspicious. Welcome back to Plague Anxiety. It only gets worse from here. By the next morning, the market feels emptier. Not abandoned, not ruined. Just thinner, as though someone quietly removed pieces of ordinary life during the night and hoped nobody would notice. But people notice. Of course they do. Markets are the heartbeat of places like this. You measure normal life through noise here. Voices bargaining, Animals protesting. Merchants shouting exaggerated promises about products of deeply questionable quality. When those sounds begin fading, something feels wrong immediately. You step carefully through damp morning mud toward the village square again. The sky hangs low and gray, heavy clouds threatening rain but never fully committing. Very medieval weather. Unnecessarily dramatic. The first thing you notice is absence. The fish seller is still gone. The cloth merchant's stall remains closed. The spice cart from the neighboring town never arrived. Nobody says why. Nobody asks loudly. People have begun understanding something dangerous. Answers sometimes make fear worse. Instead, conversations stay short, controlled, quiet. A vegetable seller arranges wilted greens without enthusiasm. Two customers stand farther apart than usual. One glances nervously when the other coughs. The cough itself sounds harmless, ordinary even. But nobody treats ordinary things normally anymore. You pass a bread stall. Smaller selection today. Smaller crowd too. The baker looks exhausted. "You late?" he asks quietly. "Didn't bake much." He lowers his voice. "Didn't know who'd come." That sentence lands strangely, because he is not talking about customers. Not really. He means survival. He means uncertainty. Who stays healthy? Who disappears? Who wakes tomorrow? Nobody says those parts out loud. You buy bread anyway, dense enough to survive a small siege, possibly useful if negotiations with doors become necessary. A group stands near the center of the square, speaking in hushed voices. You drift closer. Nobody openly invites themselves into medieval conversations, but everybody quietly does it anyway. Town east of here shut its gates. Won't allow travelers, said sickness-followed merchants. That word again. Travelers. More dangerous by the day. Yesterday strangers inspired curiosity. Today they inspire caution. Tomorrow? Hard to say. A woman carrying eggs shakes her head. Can't trust roads anymore. Nobody disagrees. Roads connect villages. Roads bring supplies. Roads also bring rumors. And perhaps sickness. Fear has turned movement itself suspicious. You notice another change. Children. Fewer outside. Normally they run through streets causing mild chaos and very loud opinions. Today most stay close to home. Adults call them back quickly. Too quickly. A boy chasing a dog gets shouted at for wandering near the tanner lane. He retreats immediately. Even children understand now. Something has changed. Something dangerous. Though nobody explains exactly what. The tanner house still sits closed. Shutters drawn. Door unopened. No smoke today. That detail unsettles you more than expected. Yesterday smoke meant life. No smoke invites darker thoughts. Someone has left another basket outside. Bread. A jug of water. No note. No knock. Just careful distance. A kindness wrapped tightly in fear. Across the square, a traveling merchant finally appears. Alone. Very alone. His cart looks lighter than usual, his expression tired. Nobody rushes toward him. Nobody greets him warmly. People watch. Carefully. A silence settles before anyone speaks. Where have you come from? Someone asks. The merchant hesitates. Too long. Wrong move. North Road. Another silence. Things bad there? He shrugs uneasily. Depends where. Nobody likes that answer. Depends where sounds like danger wandering unpredictably. Someone else asks, you sick? Straight to the point. Medieval subtlety officially retired. The merchant sighs. No. But he looks offended. And tired, and perhaps slightly worried himself, because suspicion works both ways. He studies the villagers carefully too. Wondering who coughs. Who looks pale. Who seems unsafe. Trust shrinks quickly during hard times. Trade depends on trust. Plague destroys it. You notice people buying differently now. Less luxury. More necessity. Bread, salt, dry foods, candles. Things for staying alive. Nobody shopping cheerfully for ribbons during possible catastrophe. A butcher wraps meat while arguing softly with a customer. Price went up. Why? Harder getting supplies. That sentence matters. Fear spreads beyond sickness. Shortages begin quietly. First, fewer carts arrive. Then fewer goods. Then higher prices. Then hunger joins worry. And hunger never improves anyone's mood. Near the church, several villagers speak with the priest again. He listens patiently. Tired eyes. Heavy posture. The look of someone answering impossible questions repeatedly. Why would God allow this? Will prayer stop it? Are we cursed? Big questions, no comforting answers. You overhear part of his response. We care for each other. A good answer, practical, human, though even he sounds uncertain. Nearby, someone mutters that another village has begun refusing outsiders entirely, barricading roads, closing gates, families separated, travel interrupted, fear-making borders where none existed before. The idea unsettles everyone. Isolation sounds protective. And lonely. Mostly lonely. The square grows quieter as morning stretches on. Even animals seem calmer somehow. Or perhaps people simply notice stillness more now. A cart rolls through carrying sacks of grain, normally ordinary. Today everyone watches closely. You are learning something strange about fear. Once danger enters a place, every movement becomes meaningful. Every stranger suspicious. Every absence important. Every sound interpreted. You notice a woman rubbing herbs into cloth before tying it around her child's face. Protection. Maybe. Comfort, certainly. The line between medicine and hope grows blurry here. By afternoon, rain finally arrives. Light at first, then steady. People retreat indoors quickly. Market stalls close earlier than usual. No lingering conversations. No lazy wandering. The village folds inward. Quiet. Wet. Uneasy. You duck beneath shelter near the church steps for a moment. Rain taps softly against wood and stone. A bell rings once. Then again. Not hurried. Measured. You notice nobody even asks anymore. People just lower their eyes, count silently, and continue walking, as though grief now belongs to routine. On your way home, you pass the Tanner house again. Still shut. Still silent. Rain drips from the roof. The untouched basket remains near the door. Bread growing damp. Water untouched. And suddenly, for the first time, the village feels genuinely frightened. Because silence inside a house can become its own terrible answer. Rain continues through the night. Soft at first. Then harder. By morning, the village smells different. Wetter. Colder. Heavier somehow. Mud thickens along the paths, gripping boots with determination, as though even walking now requires permission. You wake before sunrise again, not because you slept particularly well. Nobody sleeps particularly well anymore. Sleep has become restless. Interrupted. Every cough in the dark feels meaningful. Every creak of wood suspicious. Every distant bell impossible to ignore. For a moment, lying beneath rough blankets, you almost convince yourself things feel normal. Then you remember. The market. The whispers. The closed shutters. The untouched basket outside the Tanner house. And just like that, fear returns before breakfast. Very efficient of it. You sit up slowly. The room smells of damp wool and smoke. Someone nearby mutters quietly in sleep. Another shifts beneath blankets. The fire pit has gone cold. Outside, rain taps steadily against the roof. You realize something uncomfortable. Bad weather makes fear worse. Storms shrink the world. Keep people indoors. Leave too much room for thinking. And medieval thinking, unfortunately, tends toward catastrophe. You step outside later than usual. The village feels subdued, muted. Smoke rises lazily from chimneys, blending into low gray skies. Fewer people outside today. Those who are move quickly. Heads lowered. Conversations brief. Nobody wandering without purpose. Fear now has momentum. And momentum changes places. You notice it in how doors open less, how windows stay covered, how people glance before speaking. Even greetings feel shortened. A nod instead of conversation. Distance instead of closeness. Near the well, Two women stand quietly filling buckets. No gossip, no laughter. Just practical silence. One finally speaks. "You hear about the cooper?" The other nods once. "He's sick?" "His wife too." That lands heavily. Another house, another family. No longer rumors from distant roads. No longer strangers. Closer now. The village shrinks when sickness gains familiar names. You continue walking, past muddy fences, past nervous chickens pecking stubbornly through puddles, past homes that somehow already look more tired than before. Rain has darkened the wood. Everything feels older, softer around the edges. As though the village itself grows exhausted. Near the churchyard, you notice fresh earth, newly disturbed. Too much of it. Nobody stands nearby. No ceremony this morning. Just rain settling quietly into the mud. You do not stare long. People here avoid lingering near grief. Partly respect, partly fear, mostly fear. The church bells ring again. Not dramatic, never dramatic. That somehow makes them worse. Measured sounds, routine sounds, the kind that suggest terrible things have become familiar. You notice people barely pause anymore. A few cross themselves. One woman whispers a prayer. A man removes his hat briefly. Then everyone keeps moving, life continuing stubbornly around loss. You wonder how many bells people stop hearing after enough time passes. How grief becomes background noise. How humans somehow adapt even to terrible things. At the edge of the churchyard, the priest speaks quietly with a family. A father, a mother, a young daughter, holding tightly to her mother's hand. The father looks pale, not sick exactly. Exhausted, scared. The priest rests a hand gently on his shoulder. No grand speeches, no dramatic gestures. Just quiet patience. You suspect patience has become one of the village's rarest comforts lately. The Tanner house still remains shut. But now something feels different. A smell, faint, wrong. Hard to describe, not obvious at first. Just enough to make people hurry slightly when passing. Nobody mentions it directly. Nobody says the thing everyone thinks. Bad air, rot, sickness. Fear has trained people to notice smells now. To distrust them. A man nearby presses herbs to his face. Strong-smelling herbs. He avoids looking directly toward the house, as though anyone still wonders. You notice nobody leaves food anymore. Yesterday's basket is gone, untouched. Rain-soaked. Removed quietly. No replacement. That realization feels sadder than expected. Fear can slowly overpower kindness. Not because people stop caring, because survival grows louder. At the market square, things feel smaller again. Half the stalls closed. The butcher absent. The spice seller missing. A farmer apologizes for higher prices. Can't get enough workers, he says. Another consequence. Illness steals labor first. Comfort second. Food eventually. Nobody says panic out loud. But practical worry settles everywhere. What happens if crops fail? What happens if workers vanish? What happens if roads stop entirely? A merchant argues quietly with a customer. No touching coins directly. Careful exchanges, hands withdrawn quickly. People inventing invisible rules before understanding invisible dangers. You overhear strange remedies again. Burn rosemary. Carry flowers. Avoid damp places. Pray more. Bleed the sick. Sleep sitting upright. Do not eat too much fruit. Do eat more onions. Honestly, medieval medicine increasingly sounds like desperate guessing, performed with confidence. One older villager insists vinegar protects against illness. Another swears by garlic. A third recommends avoiding sadness. Helpful advice, though current circumstances are not exactly cooperating. Children speak softer too now. That surprises you. Even they sense change. One boy asks another quietly, "Think it'll come here?" The second boy shrugs. It already is. No child should sound that resigned. And yet, afternoon settles heavily. Rain eases. Cold lingers. Smoke rises into damp skies. The village feels quieter than ever. Not empty. Not dead. Just careful. As though everyone has started living around an invisible wound. And then, for the first time, you hear it. Not bells. Not rumors. Crying. Quiet at first. muffled through rain-heavy air, coming from somewhere near the Cooper's house. Nobody runs toward it. Nobody gathers. People pause, listen briefly, then look away, a terrible new understanding passing silently between them. You stand still longer than most, because something shifts in that moment. Fear becomes real, not distant, not theoretical, not whispered, real, close enough to hear, and somewhere nearby, another church bell begins ringing. One heavy sound, then another, measured, patient, unhurried in the way only terrible things seem to be. You stand motionless for a moment in the damp road, listening as the sound rolls through the village once again. Nobody reacts dramatically. That is what unsettles you most. No shouting, no gasping, no running toward the church to demand answers. People simply pause. A woman lowers her eyes. A farmer removes his hat briefly. Someone quietly crosses themselves. Then life resumes, not because anyone feels calm, because life insists on continuing, even when fear settles in permanently. Especially then, rainwater still clings to rooftops, and puddles gather in uneven paths, as the village shifts carefully around another loss. You realize something uncomfortable. The bells no longer surprise people. That feels dangerous. The first time, everyone whispered. The second time, everyone worried. Now, people count. Quietly, privately. As though each ring belongs to some invisible tally nobody wants to acknowledge. You begin walking toward the church, not quickly. Nobody hurries toward sad news. The muddy path pulls stubbornly at your boots. Smoke drifts low through damp air. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks once before falling strangely quiet again. Even animals feel quieter lately, or perhaps silence simply feels louder now. Near the churchyard, several villagers stand scattered rather than gathered. Nobody crowds together anymore. Distance has become instinct. You overhear fragments. Cooper's wife. Through the night. Priest came late. The Cooper. Of course. Yesterday it was worry. Today it is certainty. The crying you heard earlier suddenly makes sense, or perhaps sense is the wrong word. Nothing about this feels reasonable. Only inevitable. You glance toward the Cooper's house farther down the lane. Shutters closed. Door barely cracked open. No movement. A neighbor leaves a bucket of water near the entrance. No knock. Just quiet kindness. Quick retreat. Again, compassion wrapped tightly inside fear. You notice something else now. People are beginning to move around grief, like stepping around deep mud. Carefully, practically. Nobody lingers too long near sorrow. Nobody wants to stand close enough to invite bad luck. Or sickness. Or both. The priest steps outside the church. He looks older than he did a few days ago. Not dramatically older, just tired, in a permanent kind of way. The sort of tiredness that settles into shoulders, into posture, into voice. He speaks softly with a family waiting near the steps. No smiles, no easy reassurances, just quiet words carried away by damp wind. You wonder how many frightened faces he has seen already. How many impossible questions. How long will this last? Will my family survive? Did we do something wrong? Questions with no useful answers. You drift closer to the churchyard. Fresh earth again, more of it now. The ground dark from rain. Uneven. You stop yourself from counting. Counting feels dangerous, as though numbers might turn worry into reality. Nearby, two men speak quietly. Town north of us buried 6 this week. 6? The second man exhales slowly. More maybe. Nobody raises their voice anymore. Bad news arrives softly now. Like everything else. A cart creaks somewhere behind you. Slow wheels through wet mud. Heavy wheels. You turn. And there it is. Not dramatic. Just deeply unsettling. A plain wooden cart. Covered loosely with rough cloth. Moving toward the church. The driver keeps his eyes forward, never looking at anyone. Nobody steps into its path. Nobody waves. Nobody speaks. The entire road seems to widen silently around it. You notice villagers pretending not to stare. which mostly results in everyone very obviously staring. Fear has made people awkward. The cart slows briefly near the churchyard. Several men move carefully to help. Quietly, no ceremony, no crowd, no dramatic sadness, only exhaustion. The sort of exhaustion that comes when grief begins arriving faster than recovery. You look away after a moment, not out of politeness exactly, because something inside you suddenly feels too heavy, too real. This morning, the village still felt afraid. Now it feels tired. Fear eventually becomes fatigue. People cannot panic forever. Eventually they settle into quieter emotions. Worry, routine, careful hope. The market square later feels even emptier. Half-open stalls, short conversations, no unnecessary wandering. People buy quickly and leave. A woman collecting bread asks the baker, "Still enough flour?" The baker hesitates. For now. For now. Two small words, carrying far too much weight. Everything feels temporary now. Safety, food, normal life, even certainty itself. At the edge of the square, someone burns dried herbs in a small metal dish. Smoke curls upward, sharp-smelling, protective, supposedly. Several villagers pass through it deliberately, letting smoke brush against clothes. A ritual, medicine, comfort, maybe all three. You almost join them. At this point, honestly, even mildly suspicious smoke starts sounding reassuring. A child nearby asks quietly, "Why do the bells keep ringing?" Nobody answers immediately. Adults exchange looks. Eventually, someone says softly, "To pray." Not entirely untrue, but not complete either. Children still receive softened versions of fear, though less softened by the day. As afternoon fades, clouds finally break enough for weak sunlight to appear. Golden light touches rooftops briefly. Almost beautiful. Strangely beautiful. That feels unfair somehow. The world's still finding ways to look peaceful, while people quietly unravel beneath it. You pass the Tanner house again. Still silent, still closed, no smoke, no movement. But now, someone has marked the door with a simple piece of cloth tied to the handle. No explanation, no announcement. Yet everyone passing notices and walks slightly faster. The village has begun speaking without words. Closed shutters, quiet roads, untouched homes, bells, cloth markers, people stepping back without discussing why. Fear has created a new language, one everyone understands immediately. Night begins arriving earlier now. Or maybe evenings simply feel longer when people dread them. Doors close sooner, fires burn lower, families gather closer together. Not comfort exactly, just instinct, because darkness brings silence. And silence leaves too much room for listening, for counting coughs, for imagining symptoms, for wondering whether tomorrow's bells will ring again. And deep down, you already know they will. Not peacefully. Carefully. As though even darkness understands something fragile has taken hold here. The road's empty earlier now. Doors close before sunset fully disappears. Candles glow behind shuttered windows like tiny islands of stubborn warmth against an increasingly uneasy world. You sit near the fire inside, though fire might be generous. Mostly glowing embers attempting optimism. The room feels smaller after sunset. Walls closer. Air heavier. Every sound somehow louder. Someone shifts in sleep nearby. A pot settles with a soft crack near the hearth. Outside, rainwater drips steadily from rooftops. Ordinary sounds. Yet tonight they feel unsettling. Because fear has changed how listening works. You no longer hear noises. You interpret them. A cough? Concerning. Footsteps outside? Suspicious. Church bells? Always bad. And somewhere between exhaustion and worry, your imagination begins doing deeply unhelpful work. You wonder about symptoms. Again, that strange ache in your shoulder earlier. Probably nothing. Certainly alarming. A bit tired? Concerning. Cold hands? Potential disaster. Congratulations. You have entered the advanced stage of plague anxiety, where existing inside your own body becomes mildly stressful. Sleep comes slowly, not because the room is uncomfortable, though it absolutely is. No, discomfort feels familiar now. It is the thinking that keeps you awake. The wondering. Who else has fallen ill? What happens if the sickness reaches your house? Would anyone help? Or leave bread quietly outside your door and walk away quickly? That last thought lingers longer than you would like. Because you understand now. Fear isolates people long before illness does. You wake sometime later. No idea when. The room dark except for faint orange light from dying embers. At first, you do not know what woke you. Then, voices outside. Quiet. Hurried. Not normal late-night voices. You stay still. Listening. A door opens nearby. Then closes quickly. Footsteps through mud. Someone crying softly. Another voice whispering urgently. Fetch the priest. The sentence lands heavily. Nobody fetches the priest at this hour for cheerful reasons. The house grows still around you. Others are awake too. You can tell. Nobody speaks. But everyone listens. Waiting. The worst part about fear at night is how imagination expands. Daylight gives worry boundaries. Night removes them. Everything feels larger in darkness. More serious. More final. Eventually, the voices fade. But sleep refuses to return properly. Outside, the village settles into uneasy silence again. A silence interrupted only occasionally. A dog barking somewhere far away. A distant door closing. The soft movement of wind. And once, very faintly, someone coughing. The sound carries strangely through the night air. You hate how immediately everyone notices coughing now. How every small illness suddenly feels catastrophic. By dawn, exhaustion sits heavily on everyone. You rise stiffly. Cold again. Always cold. Morning arrives gray and damp, carrying none of the hopeful feeling mornings usually promise. Outside, fewer people appear. You notice that immediately. Less movement. Less conversation. Less pretending. The village feels withdrawn, like someone hurt but unwilling to admit how badly. Near the well, women speak in lower voices than ever. You overhear pieces, through the night, not expected to last. Children sent away. Children sent away. That detail catches you. Some families have begun separating, sending younger relatives elsewhere. To cousins. To safer villages. Assuming safer villages still exist. Distance suddenly feels protective, though nobody truly knows if it works. You walk slowly through the lane. The cooper's house remains closed. Someone has placed fresh herbs near the doorway, or protection. Hard to tell anymore. Near the tanner house, people no longer even glance openly. They simply move around it. Faster. Heads lowered. Like avoiding eye contact with fear itself. The cloth tied to the door handle hangs damp from overnight mist. No movement inside. No sound. The silence feels heavier today. At the market square, fewer stalls open again. You count instinctively, then stop. Counting keeps becoming dangerous. Too revealing. A farmer shakes his head when someone asks about supplies. Hard-getting workers. Another problem growing quietly. People stay home more. Travel less. Work interrupted. Life shrinking inward. One merchant mutters, feels cursed. Nobody argues. Not because everyone believes in curses. Because certainty of any kind feels oddly comforting. People want reasons. Even bad ones. Especially bad ones. Anything easier than not knowing. Near the church, a notice has been nailed to a wooden post. Simple instructions. Avoid crowded gatherings. Pray. Report sickness. Stay cautious. Nobody seems reassured. Still, people stop to read. Then quietly move on. The priest stands nearby, speaking gently with worried villagers. He looks exhausted again, though somehow still patient. A woman asks quietly, "Should we stop visiting family?" The priest hesitates. That hesitation says everything. No good answer exists. Care for people. Avoid people. Stay close. Keep distance. Fear has made every decision feel wrong somehow. You notice neighbors greeting one another differently now. From farther away, hands staying to themselves. No lingering. No unnecessary closeness. People adapting without fully understanding why. Humans are strangely good at changing habits once survival enters the room. The afternoon passes slowly. Clouds drift low. Smoke curls upward from scattered chimneys. Some houses remain quiet too long. Others suddenly crowded with worried visitors standing awkwardly outside. Nobody entering. Nobody staying. You realize something sad. The village still cares deeply. People have not become cruel. Just afraid. Fear bends kindness into strange shapes. Food left outside doors. Prayers offered from distance. Quiet help without closeness. Love rearranged for survival. As evening approaches, the roads empty again. Earlier than yesterday, people no longer waiting for dark, just preparing for it. Inside homes, fires burn softly. Doors lock. Families sit close, listening, always listening. Because once fear settles into a place, silence becomes impossible to trust. And somewhere outside, as daylight fades, the bells begin again.